breaking free from the rat race is actually identifying how we are primarily not acting in this world. We're not acting, we're reacting. And what is reacting? Reacting is our programming that you just told us that is driving 95% of our daily actions that are there, or reactions rather. We think that they're actions, but so much of us are going about the world reacting from one thing to another and then honking at somebody in traffic. And then we turn on the news and we hear about something terrible happening. And we take that energy into every next situation we happen. And then you wake up and you think, why am I not manifesting the life of my dreams? Well, you're still caught up in the programming.
That is it. And it's also really important to understand this, because my aspect of it wasn't so much the physics. I got into the physics, but I came from the biological point of view. And I used to be a professor in a medical school. So my work was really involved with a lot about health and understanding health. And it's really interesting because my work led me into that new field of science called epigenetics, which is control above the genes rather than being the victim of the genes as we have been programmed. It turns out we are in a healthcare crisis. It's always been this interesting belief, especially in the States, if you throw more money at it, we'll handle it. And it's interesting because we put more and more and more and more money into the healthcare system, and the healthcare crisis is getting worse and worse and worse every day. And the significance is, at some level, we have been programmed to believe that our health issues are tied up to our genetics and our heredity. Oh, there's cancer running in the family. Oh my God, I could get a cancer gene or Alzheimer's gene or cardiac disease. And I say, this is a belief that your life is not in your control. This is a belief that you learn that the genes you inherited from your parents control you, and you don't control them. So you start off with a victim mentality. Oh my God, there's cancer running in the family. I could get that cancer gene. I could get the cancer. Well, I'm going to give you the straightforward scientific facts right now, folks. Very simple. Number one, there's no gene that causes cancer. There's not one gene that causes cancer, meaning you have this gene, you get cancer. No, genes are correlated with cancer, meaning if the behavior is not in harmony, you can activate what is called a cancer gene and manifest the cancer. Did the cancer gene cause the cancer? I say, no, the cancer gene responded to the disharmony in that individual's life. Anger that was repressed or inability to express yourself, issues that are tearing you apart from the inside, more or less, are manifesting through a cancer. So, for example, especially women need to hear this, because you know how programmed they are. It's like, oh my God, if you get the breast cancer gene, you're going to die of the breast cancer. I go, well, first of all, that story is 100% wrong. Why? Breast cancer genes don't cause breast cancer. 95% of the women that are carrying these genes, they have the belief that, oh my God, I can get cancer. I say, what's the vision of that? What's in your mind? I go, it was a picture of cancer. I go, get that out of your mind, because your mind's going to translate it into your biology through what science we call epigenetics. The point about it is this: 50% of the breast cancer gene carrying women never get the breast cancer. So what does that mean right away? Well, possession of the gene doesn't mean you get the cancer. Possession of the gene in disharmony, now that will get you the cancer. And it turns out, here's a fact, less than 1% of disease on this planet is even connected to genetics. I go, where's the healthcare crisis coming from? You ready for it? Here we go. You ready? 90% of illness is due to stress. Voila. That's the game. I say, why? Because the first stress, for example, for a woman is that I have a breast cancer gene. Okay, that's stress. right away. You already started the game right there. But the simple reality is this, is what we know, is that the bodies, 99% of them genetically came here in a good situation, never to have these kinds of problems. And then you say, then how come the healthcare crisis? And I say, because of stress. Can I talk about stress here?
Yeah, please. Absolutely. Audience would love
Because
to.
I need to give you a reason, not just say, oh, stress is, no, there's a reason why. And I say, well, why? What's the emphasis of stress? Threat. There's something is threatening you. And does it have to be life? No, it could be, yeah, I could get a threat against my life. I could get a threat against my advancement in the job. I could be threatened about my relationship with that person over there. So threats don't have to be end of life. They're just things that interfere with where you want to go in this life. You want to do something. You want to be healthy. You want to be happy. You want to have a great job. Things get in the way of that. They cause stress, okay? Because you're out of control. When you're out of control, stress takes us to a situation called fight or flight. You're facing a situation, you got, fight or flight. You're either going to fight this damn thing or you're going to run from this damn thing. Actually, the third one is you act with no action, just like you're dead. Just stand there. Don't respond. So those are responses that you can have under stress. I go, so yeah, but what does this translate to in the biology? So you understand, don't blame your biology for a health issue before you understand what I'm going to say. And here's what it is. There are 3 things that result from stress that cause illness. And here they are. First, let's go back to when did the stress response be, when was it created? I go, well, 100,000 years ago when we were running away from a saber-toothed tiger, because that was the threat. Okay? And I go, so, well, what was the threat based on? Fight or flight. I say, yeah, and what do you use for fight or flight? Which pancreas, gallbladder? No, arms and legs, man. You need the arms and legs. Fight or flight. That's what we're going to do, okay? So the significance about this comes down to a simple understanding. It goes like this. What organs do you use for fight or flight? And the answer is arms and legs. I go, so what? I say, but you need to energize them. I go, yes, you do, because you're going to run. You're going to need it. And I say, now put the picture together because here comes the piece. What carries the energy? The blood. So when you're in fight or flight, running from a saber-toothed tiger, where do you think you want the blood to be concentrated in your body? Where? Okay, let's go back to the answer. Arms and legs. I need them to run. So I say, now listen to this. It's right out of a textbook, physiology. When stress hormones are released into the system, the blood is preferentially sent to the arms and legs. I go, preferentially? Where the hell was the blood before it was in the arms and legs? It's mainly in the gut. I go, so what's the gut? It's energy. The blood is energizing the gut. To do what? I go, the gut's function is to take care of the body. Clean it, filter it, repair it. All of the functions to maintain the biology of the body is run by the organs in the gut. Okay? Then I say, but when the stress hormones are released into the body, guess what happens? The blood vessels in the gut squeeze shut. And I go, well, what happens if they squeeze shut? It causes the blood to be pushed to the outside of the body, arms and legs. And so I say, the first thing that happens when you're afraid is what? Butterflies in the stomach. The queasy feeling of fear. I go, what is it? You're actually feeling the blood vessels squeeze shut, pushing the blood, getting ready for you to run to save yourself, fight or flight, okay? So that's number 1. When you're in a state of stress, you shut down the growth and maintenance of the body. Number 2, the immune system protects you from internal threat. A saber-toothed tiger is an external threat. So I say, well, let's say you have a bacterial infection and you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. How would you split the energy? How much should you put into the immune system to fight the bacteria? And how much of the energy should you put in to run away from the tiger? You ready for the answer? The hell with the bacteria. If the tiger catches you, you don't have a problem with bacteria anymore. So what's the point? Stress hormones shut down the immune system as a function. And I go, Let me show you how important it is. When they want to transplant an organ from person A to person B, they give the recipient stress hormones before the operation so that when the transplant occurs, the recipient's immune system will not reject it. So I go, oh my God, stress hormones are so valuable at shutting off the immune system, they use it therapeutically. I go, okay, so now we have two things happening here. Fear, stress, shut down the gut, put the blood in the arms and legs. 2, shut down the immune system because I don't need to be concerned with the internal problem if the tiger's chasing me. Number 3, and this is an important one, it shuts down the blood vessels of the forebrain, the thinking brain. I go, why? Because thinking is too slow when you need to make a reaction. When you need to make a response, a thought is like, no, you need to go. You need not thinking. You need to react, which is hindbrain. So when you squeeze the blood vessels in the forebrain shut, it pushes the blood to the hindbrain, gets you ready for fight or flight. So I say, well, this is an interesting development in the human body. And I go, yes, it is. And I go, what was it designed for? To run away from the saber-toothed tiger. And I go, why is that important? Because if that's a chase, it might be 10 minutes. And if you escape, no more saber-toothed tiger, you go back into growth again. So protection was only designed for a short period of time to escape the threat. Now I say, but today, the threats are 24/7, 365. And stress hormones are dripping into your body every day, interfering with your growth and maintenance of your body, interfering with your immune system, interfering with your intelligence. And then you look at why we have such a problem on this planet today, because not only are they sick, people are acting kind of stupid. And it's not that they're stupid. It's that the stress hormones make them a victim and they're looking for the reaction to get out. Not thinking, reacting. And therefore they'll look for somebody else to take care of them. I'm a victim. Who's watching out for me? and all of a sudden you give up your power. Oh yeah, we give up our power. If you were here during COVID, which I presume all of you were, everybody gave up their power. They gave it up. They let a few people, a handful of people, determine the behavior of everybody on this planet. A handful of people said, put the mask on, keep away from each other, don't talk to each other, blah, 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 blah. And everybody's like, yeah. And I said, you don't even know what happened, baby. I said, what? The entire human population was disempowered. Why? People only have power in community. And in COVID, 0 community existed. And all of a sudden they go, whoa, you guys didn't even see the wool pull over your eyes. You were powerless during that period of time. And but I think people wised up because they tried to introduce another COVID wave and people are like, yeah, sure, it's gone, you know? But the point about it was what? We are creating this, and you have the power to have a honeymoon every day of your life. But to exercise that power, then you either A, have to stop thinking, stay mindful, or B, change the program. Those are 2 choices in your life right now. Do I need to change my health? I say, no, your health is a result of the program. 1%, less than 1% of the people can go to the doctor and say, physically, I have some defect. You have to help me with this defect. Less than 1%. So what about the rest of us? Epigenetics, our consciousness, has created our biological expression. Negative consciousness, negative biological expression. And we live in a world of stress and fear and anxiety. I go, causes disease. And all of a sudden it says, well, if you want to be healthy, then you have to recognize you are the creator. And I will admit, yeah, less than 1% of you, there's a number of you that do have a biological, especially genetic issue that might be interfering with your life, but that's a very small percent, considering that 99% of you are not affected by that. So where's your problem coming from? That's really what we come down to.
Yeah, and it's not that you're saying that, you're not saying that like it's not important to work out or eat healthy or do these things. You're saying that first it's the programming that we address. And when we address the programming, those things start to change. Sometimes when we jump to the actions without addressing our programming, we fall backwards. We're just gearing up towards the end of the year. We're coming up to a new year that's ahead. And it's natural. People make New Year's resolutions, other things like that. And we know the data on it. The vast majorities don't work because it can come, maybe for some people, it will come in a moment of insight or a moment of even thinking, okay, I want to better my life. I want to achieve X, Y, and Z. I want to lose weight. I want to do this. But if the programming is not addressed, from what I'm understanding from you, then you get what happens to most people, which is most of these resolutions, regardless of what time of year they're set, they're not successful because we haven't addressed the root programming.
100%. This is the whole issue, is because we're looking for, like, my thought is going to change something. Yep, I'm going to get healthy. I go, while you're thinking that, are you doing anything to get healthy? I say, no, you're thinking. You're not even working on getting healthy. You're just thinking. You got to do something. The whole COVID story was based on the fact that everyone was afraid that the virus was so toxic, everybody was going to die. And yet, 40% of the people, when they started doing testing, were found to be positive, and they had no idea in their whole life experience that they were affected by anything. I go, what's the meaning of that? And I said, those people, their immune system was working really good, and they handle it like a flu. And what it is, it's a flu, okay? And I said, so what about the others? I said, the ones that got really sick, listen to this. They have what are called comorbidities. The ones that end up in a hospital, they were sick before the COVID got there. Most of them, 70-some%, overweight, extremely obese. Another 70-so%, diabetes type 2. Another group of people, the stress level and cardiac function has been impaired. This is before the virus showed up. I go, so what was the point? They were not healthy. It's interesting. People always blame wolves for, killing animals and stuff like that. And then because farmers didn't like it because they killed the farm animals. But what were they doing in nature? And I say, they were killing animals in nature, but they were in harmony with nature. I said, what do you mean? The wolves didn't pick the strongest, biggest animal in the herd with the biggest antlers and say, that's the one I'm going to get. The wolves only picked out the weakest elements, those that were sick or were in some way, their life was compromised in some way. And they took out the weakest elements, which did what? They were strengthening the herd. That was really what the result was, okay? And I go, interesting, if I want to apply that to the COVID, I could say it was the wolf. And it said, if you were healthy, you went through it without any serious issue. If you were compromised, and this also affected the elderly. I'm not saying people didn't die, man, people died a lot. But we blamed it on the COVID when we should have recognized, are we being healthy? And the answer is nope. And a lot of people think all you have to do is take the prescription drug and then you will be healthy. I go, nope, because it's biology and everything is based on use it or lose it. Are we moving? Are we exercising? Are we doing anything with our bodies besides sitting at the desk and looking at the computer screen, which means you're not using the rest of your body. I go, there's a very simple principle. It's called use it or lose it. I go, everyone go, oh yeah, muscles. If you use them, they get big and strong. And then when you stop using them, they get weak again. Use it or lose it applies to every cell, tissue, and organ in your body. Every one. When you're not using something, the biology at some point goes, and why am I maintaining it? Its function is to take it apart. We fall apart. because we fail to continue using the machinery of our bodies. Oh, I'm too old to do that. And I go, as soon as you said that, you already started, you already said, okay, I'm not doing stuff now because I'm old. I go, well, now you're going to get old for sure, you know? And it's really so important because health, it comes with a mechanism, but it's also involved with the maintenance of the mechanism. You know, you go to a junkyard and they got 100 cars stacked up over here. I said, are these because they were poorly manufactured cars? I go, nah, maybe 1-2%, maybe. I said, but then what's the rest of them here for? Bad drivers. And all of a sudden I go, your body is a vehicle and you are the driver. How's your driver education? Did you learn how to take care of your vehicle? My new vehicle is a 1996 Nissan right now. That's my new one, okay? And the point about it is, if you get in, it's like, wow, it's like new in here, you know? And I take care of it. Why? I don't need to buy another car every couple of years. It's 96. I've had this how many years now? I take care of it. It takes care of me. Your body is a vehicle. Are you taking care of it? Or are you expecting it just to keep hanging on? I go, it will all be based on use it or lose it. Dementia, old age. And they say, oh, that's part of old age. I say, no, you know what it's part of? Lack of communication. That as people get older, they lose their social connections. They lose their social connections. They're not using the social part of that brain. And I go, then what happens? Use it or lose it. They lose it. The main problem with dementia is lack of use of the brain.
Which you're saying also, well, let me ask you, that would also spill over if you're not using your social connections, you're also not walking with friends, you're also not working out with people, you're also not breaking bread in a healthy way with other people, you're more likely to drink alone, which all these habits are going to contribute to dementia.
Well, it's just basically, go back to what you were just understanding. Again, it was all based on a use it or lose it attitude. And a lot of people just say, once I'm too old, I will stop doing X.
Yes.
And I said, but, you know, it's fun.
I'm too old to work out. I'm too old to walk. I'm too old to, keep up with people. But you're saying that when you don't do those things, you become old.
That's exactly. You're manifesting your vision. You are creator of your life. If your vision is you're too old, then you're telling your biology, I'm too old. And the biology will conform to manifest it. I should bring this in because it's a nice piece of the story. And I said, what's the function of my mind? And here it is. You ready? To make coherence between my beliefs and my reality.
Say that one more time.
It's very important. Yeah. The function of the mind is to create coherence between your beliefs and your reality. If I have a negative belief, then the function of the mind is to manifest a negative reality so my belief is right. I'm always right. If I believe I can't do it, then I can't do it because I believe it.
So you're saying the brain is a detective, or the mind is a detective. It's always trying to prove you right for what you believe.
Actually, well, it's taking your thought and turning it into chemistry, and the chemistry matches the thought. So there's a chemistry of love. Oh, that's great. When you have a picture of love and the mind, pictures in the mind, the brain will translate that into dopamine, which is pleasure. That's why we love to be in love. Oxytocin will turn into oxytocin, which is bond with your lover. It causes the release of something called growth hormone, which does exactly what it says. So when you're in love, you're in pleasure, you're bonded, and you're healthy. That's why people, see how in love they are. See how they glow. That glow is good health. I go, that's not an accident. That's chemistry. I go, but if you have a picture of fear, you release none of those chemicals into the body. You start to release stress hormones into the body as well as chemicals that control the immune system. And I say, that has a whole different body expression. And all of a sudden, so I say, well, what's the job here? The mind takes a picture, translates it into chemistry, which then causes the body to manifest that picture physically. If it's a picture of health, And the function of the mind is to create the health that comes in your body, and I'm getting healthy and I'm working on it, I'm making health, okay? And in contrast, it's like, oh, I don't feel good anymore. Oh, I got a pain in here. And I go, oh, okay. You want a pain in there? You can have a pain in there anytime you want. You want to die? You can die because you're going to believe you're supposed to die. Meaning, they've looked at a number of autopsies of people who died from cancer. Why? Because their doctor has told them they were going to die of cancer in so many months, and they die within some range of those months. And then they do the autopsy and find out they didn't die from the cancer. There wasn't enough cancer to kill them. What did they die from? The belief they were going to die. You know, there's positive and negative belief. And people go, positive belief, that doesn't work. I was always thinking positive and it never worked. I go, yeah, but while you were thinking, of course, then you weren't creating either. So that didn't help right there. But the point about it was what? There's something called the placebo effect. That's a scientific reality. I go, what is it? Well, someone's sick with a strange illness and the doctor says, oh, here's the newest, greatest medicine that ever came. That is just designed for your illness. And that person takes the medicine, they get better. And then they find out the medicine was a sugar pill. And we call that, oh, that's called the placebo. I said, yeah, it is. I said, what healed the patient? Obviously, not the sugar pill. So I said, then what healed them? Their belief in the sugar pill. It wasn't the sugar pill. I say, oh, that's a positive belief. So placebo is a reflection of positive thinking. I go, yes, it is. And then I say, oh, that's cool. I say, you know, you want to ask me about negative thinking? Because nobody asked about negative thinking. I go, negative thinking is equally powerful as positive thinking, but it works in the opposite direction. A placebo can heal you of any disease, and a negative thinking called nocebo can cause any disease, including death. If you believe you're going to die and you really, really believe you're going to die, you will die. It's a belief system.
Yeah, I have this quote from you that I pulled for the interview, and you said, the belief in the inevitability of aging, which is so important as everybody's talking about longevity and thinking about this term. The belief in the inevitability of aging is the most dangerous belief in the world. One of the biggest changes I made to my sleep routine was to start taking this Magnesium Breakthrough by Bioptimizers. I've been taking this supplement for over 2 years and it's a game changer. You know, there are so many magnesium products on the market, but none of them are like this one. Let me tell you why. First of all, it contains all 7 forms of magnesium, so it's super bioavailable. Bioptimizers Magnesium Breakthrough has helped me in so many ways when it comes to sleep, mood, and digestion. I don't wake up throughout the night anymore, and I wake up, most importantly, feeling refreshed in the morning. If you're struggling with sleep or want to optimize your sleep to the next level, you have to check out this supplement. Today, my community can save up to 30% off and get access to some additional gifts using the promo code DHRUP at bioptimizers.com/DHRUP. Or click the link in the caption below. It's a game changer.
It surely is one of the big ones, you know. And I'm not going to go there if I can help it as long as I can. I mean, I'm going to go into 80 here, but I haven't let it interfere with my ability to move and do work and go out and do all the things I do. And if I start to feel like a creaky back or something, I don't go, oh, creaky back, I have to live with it. It's like, no. Let's straighten this sucker out and let's get going. And then it comes back. But if I stood there and said, oh, I guess that's the way it is, then I have committed the crime of killing myself at that moment. And that's called nocebo. And so it is a truth. There is a result of positive thinking, placebo, and there is a dire negative result for negative thinking called nocebo. Because you can actually die from the belief of dying, not even for any other reason other than a belief.
So whether it's our health or our general, because our programming impacts every aspect of our life, and some people that are listening to my channel is mostly a health channel, but of course we talk about mindset, whether it's the mind, the body, the spirit, you know, or anything, programming governs it all. And you yourself has said, as we all have, you inherited programming that you came into this world with. Can you share some of that programming that shaped your early life and some of the negative consequences that kind of came from that?
Well, of course, I already mentioned the fact that in regard to understanding relationships, how does a male following my male teacher, my father, how do you create relationships? And I copied his behavior, and the first thing was, I couldn't get a relationship off the ground with that. That has really sucked. Hey, the honeymoon part worked always nice, though. The honeymoon part was I never played my father's behavior.
As it works for most people. Most people are usually, everything is great in the honeymoon part. But do you feel that part of that is, if I could interrupt, and I know some of my audience will be upset, but no. I'm clarifying for me. Do you feel that the honeymoon part, is that truly us operating from the conscious mind? Or is it our subconscious projecting what we believe the other person is? And kind of coming back to this idea is that, do you love me or do you love the thought of me? So is it truly our conscious self, or is it this subconscious that is sort of forecasting and projecting onto that person what we think we want them to be, and we're falling in love with that idea, which is very easy to do? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I come across with a thought in physics called resonance. Resonance means if you get a vibration and something else has a similar vibration, if one starts to vibrate, it will activate the other one to vibrate, okay? So if I have two guitars next to each other and they're both tuned the same, and I pluck the A string on this guitar and the A note is going across, and the other guitar was just sitting there, as the A vibration comes across in a consequence called resonance, it will activate the A string, the same vibration, on the other guitar, okay? When you understand resonance, it says that when you send out a vibration, it will activate something that is in harmony with that vibration, okay? So I go, so why is this important? I go, when we meet somebody, number one is this. We stop playing the programs that have been the cause of most of the problems in our life, because now we're going to activate ourselves from the spirit. The spirit has the wishes and desires. And if you and another person are totally operating from spirit, there is no negative consequence in there. Not really. And the result is what? This beautiful harmony, this being in love. Life is great. Life is beautiful. Why? You're co-creating the same wishes and desires, okay? That came from the conscious mind. It's only when the subconscious programs return, because one or both of them start thinking, that behaviors that were never expressed in the relationship start to all of a sudden show up. And the person who is there responding to that vibration goes, that's a bad behavior. Bruce has a bad behavior. Now they have a choice. Do I want to put up with this, or do I want to go? And the answer first is, well, I'll put up with it. Why? Because the rest of it was pretty good. Then another bad vibe comes up, and then another bad vibe. And every time another one comes up, the thought is, do I want to be here or not? And it leads to 50% of them in the end going, no, I don't want to be here. And I said, where did it come from? I said, it was the subconscious that brought up the stuff that was not in harmony. It was the conscious that was generating harmony, okay? So I really go to the consequence of resonance. I say, why? What are you thinking? And I go, because the picture in your mind is going to be translated into chemistry, which is going to control your genetics and your behavior down below. But the idea that your mind is actually activating inside your skull, because we can put wires on your skull and then read the action of the mind called EEG, leads us to believe, yeah, my thoughts are inside my head, until we find out there's another device that reads brain function. It's called MEG, magnetoencephalograph. I go, so it reads brain function too? And I go, yeah, but what's different? The probe is out here. Because what does that mean? So stop for a minute and say, what the hell does that mean? And the answer is, I could read your thoughts out here. Guess what? Your thoughts are not contained in your head. You're broadcasting thoughts. So everybody's broadcasting thoughts. When you meet somebody, even before you communicate with them on any other level, it's the first thing you get are vibrations. And all of a sudden you can start to feel a vibration about a person even before you even say hi to them. And it depends on the energy. And some energy will enhance your energy, good vibes. And that says, oh, that person's good in my life because I get more power with that person. But there are also people who generate what are called bad vibes, and they take away your life. And those are people you don't want to be with. And I go, this is the first, most primal form of communication on the entire planet. And we as humans have sometimes been programmed, mainly many of us have been programmed not to go by your feelings. Listen to what the person has to say. And I go, big mistake. Always go with your feelings. Your feelings are the first means of communication of any biological organism. Was always done by vibration. It wasn't done by language or vision or touch. It was always vibration. And vibration can either enhance your energy, which is called good vibes. There's a technical side to this in my lectures, but right now, good vibes are something that's in harmony with you and comes together. And when they come together, it enhances your vitality. Bad vibes is just the opposite, something that comes into your energy field that takes your energy and cancels it out, which is life-threatening. That's why it's called bad vibes, okay? Primitive organisms, they don't talk to each other. They have vibes. You know, think about it. A snail comes out of an egg. There's no mother. There's no father. There's no teacher. It's thrown into the world. I say, how the hell does it know what to do? And the answer is simple. There's only one gauge on the dashboard. It's energy. If the snail goes in this direction and the energy gets lower, then the idea is program it and turn around and go in the other direction. Okay? It reads the energy. If it comes to a plant and says, is this a good plant for me or not a good plant for me? It reads the vibes of the plant. And it says, oh, this one is, I like this one. And this other plant, no, bad vibes. I don't like this one. So they eat the one. I say, what guided their whole damn life where they went and what they did? Vibes. There was no pre-program, no going to school, no learning, except for the idea is life is energy. And we have a device in our biology to always have us move toward more energy, because more energy means more life.
People have a hard time connecting to their goals, sticking to their goals, because they don't have a clear idea of their future self. What is our future self? And if we don't have a clear idea of that, what do people have a clear idea of? Is it their past self?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great way of saying it. So in psychology, the psychology of time is very different from how most people view time. Most people view time as the past is behind us, the present is where we are right now, and then the future is up ahead. And really, we put a lot of focus on the present, and that the past, we can't really do anything about it, and the future is up ahead. You can't really predict it. From a psychology standpoint, our present experience is completely based on how we frame our past as well as how we frame our future. And so what the more modern research shows is that most people have considered what would be like a fixed mindset, where they're overly identified with their past self and their present self. And so what people end up doing is that because they're so overly definitive about who they are now, what people typically do is they take who I am now and then push that off into the future. And so even if I asked you or anyone listening to this, are you the same person you were 10 years ago? So let's go back to 2013. Put yourself somewhere in the shoes of where you were, say, September of 2013. You're probably, if you thought back on it, do you see the world the same way as your 2013 self? Do you have the same goals, the same friends, the same hobbies, the same tastes in music or food? Chances are, if you really think about it, you would see massive differences between your past self and your present self. And you could actually get really good at even seeing that in the last year. But the problem is that most people, when they do that, even if they look back and see massive changes, we typically under-predict who our future self will be. So what most people do is they take their present self and they push that off into the future and just assume that their future self is going to be, for the most part, the same version they are today, just slight modifications. And there's a few problems with that. One is that it's just not true. Your future self is going to be totally different. Dr. Daniel Gilbert, who's a Harvard psychologist, he basically just says it's a lack of imagination. We just don't think about it. And so that's problem number one, is just most people aren't thinking about their future self. They don't recognize that their future self is a different person. And then big problem number two is that they don't get emotionally connected to their future self and start operating from the identity of their future self in the present. And so that's really where you can start making big gains.
So if somebody today is maybe struggling with their weight or isn't as strong as they want to be,
Sure.
doesn't have their body composition dialed in, there's part of them that is just imagining that if they're stuck and not connected to their future self, there's part of them that's imagining that, hey, my life at 80, and right now I might be 40 or 50 or 60, my life at 80 is just going to be a slight percentage off of where I am right now. And my hope is that it'll be a little bit better. My hope is that maybe I'll be making a little bit more money. My hope is that I'll be a little bit more fit. My hope is that I can lift a little bit more weights. But really, a lot of people are playing a defensive thing. Like, I hope that I'm a little better, but I just hope that things aren't going wrong. I hope that I don't have a chronic disease. I hope that I, don't get derailed from my plans. It's almost like we don't give ourselves and our potential enough credit.
Yeah, I mean, I like a lot of what you've said. And so in psychology, we generally camp motivations or goals into what would be considered approach motivations or avoid motivations. And anything that's avoid motivated means you're trying to avoid something you don't want. So if you're thinking up ahead to your future self and most of your goals are avoidance based, meaning like, I don't want this disease or I don't want that. What that means is that you're projecting a future that you don't want, and you're projecting a future that you fear, and therefore most of your goals, most of your focus is avoidance oriented, versus approach would be you're clear on what you want, you're focusing on what you want, and you're directly approaching what you want. Commitment, courage, learning new skills, and what you focus on, you'll obviously create more of. What you focus on, you filter for. So in psychology, they call it selective attention. You find what you're looking for. And so from my standpoint, it's certainly you want to be preventative, but you, in my mind, you want to be a lot more on the offense. You want to focus on what you want and really optimize for that. And so you want to look at the future you're projecting and why the goals you have are either avoidance-based or approach-based. And so, yeah, I mean, I would steer away from having a future that you fear, because that kind of just underlies everything you do.
So you mentioned imagination, and
Yeah.
part of this is sort of building the muscle of imagination and giving it the attention it deserves. Sort of two-part question. What do you feel today gets in the way of most people strengthening that muscle? And then number two is that if we wanted to give more love and attention to this imagination so we can connect to our future self, what does that look like?
So this is kind of a counterintuitive answer, but as I said before, your experience in the present is shaped by how you frame your past and how you frame your future. And a lot of people, when they think about the future, they think, okay, that's something I can imagine. When they think about the past, they think that that's something that's concrete. And the truth is that the past is just as imagined as the future. And you can get just as skillful at imagining and refining and reframing your past. And this is actually an important skill when it comes to getting better and more flexible at also imagining a different future. So just as an example, I gave you the example before of looking at your current self versus your past self 10 years ago. You can do that, and that's a great way of thinking about the differences. A lot of people don't even do that. So that's one way of reframing the past, is just looking at it 10 years and saying, what are all the ways I'm different from my past self 10 years ago? A lot of people have never even framed their past that way. But you could do that. You could get very good at that even on a monthly basis or even on a weekly basis. I might look back on my past even a week ago and say, how am I different from my past self? What do I now know that my past self didn't know? What are some of the key experiences I've had over the last week that were experiences my past self has never had? And as I get better and better at doing that, there's something really interesting that occurs. One is that I recognize that I'm not my past self even a week ago or even 24 hours ago. This speeds up my learning process. It also creates what psychologists call psychological flexibility. Last thing I want is to be overly identified with my past self. But even just as weird, like, I also don't want to overly identify with my current self. This is what Dr. Daniel Gilbert talks about. He says your current self, who you are right now, is as fleeting as the present moment. And so I also don't want to be overly attached to my current self. I know that my future self in a week from now is going to be just as different, maybe even way more different than who I was a week ago. And so regularly framing your past to recognize differences in who you are really massively creates flexibility, but it also helps you see that you're constantly changing, which creates a sense of flexibility of identity, which allows you to start thinking differently about your future self. So that's one angle. I would also just add that it's really important to view the past and the future similar to like the draft of a book, or even just the draft of anything, the draft of a letter, if you think a book feels too big, and that you can also redraft it, you can re-edit it. And so this is a really counterintuitive idea, but in psychology, they talk about memory as a reconstruction. So you're always reconstructing your memory in the present. You can't really reconstruct it anywhere else. And so because it's a reconstruction, it's a reimagination. And so this is basically the main idea is that it's not the past that determines the present. It's actually the present that shapes and determines the meaning of the past. But also, moving forward, it's not the present that should determine the future. It's actually your future that should determine what you do in the present. And so, we can map this, we can break it down, but you want to get better and better at reframing the past and taking responsibility of the past, that the past is really more of an indicator of who you are today. Who I am now is really, in other words, my past is actually more a reflection of who I am today. A lot of people think it's the opposite. A lot of people think that who they are today is because of their past. It's the opposite in psychology. In psychology, if I start telling you events of my past, I'm really describing my current self.
You're seeing it through the current self lens.
You can't not. Everything is viewed from a lens. And every time you're recounting a story, you're really describing your current self. And so if I start talking to you about, my parents divorced when I was age 11, right? Or whatever I talk about, myself last year and the things I was doing, I'm describing it as my current self. There's a great, go ahead.
Which has both good and bad that comes with it, right? The good is that they often say that when it comes to adverse childhood experiences and past trauma, it's not necessarily how much trauma you've gone through, but how you see that trauma at a later date if you've been able to overcome it and contextualize it, right? So in that sense, you might have gone through something really tough, maybe a big T trauma or little T traumas, which we've all gone through.
Sure.
But you had the coping mechanisms, the support system, the therapy, the whatever it might be, enough to see that trauma through a different lens, right? That trauma is terrible. I don't want anybody to go through that trauma. And yet so many of us will go through very tough things, like a parent's divorce, like a this, like a that. But it seems to be that the people that have some sense of resilience, they can see that past event through a different lens that helps them understand that, yes, this thing was reality. It happened. Here's the part of it that was tough. Here's the part of it that made me better. And here's what I'm going to make it mean now. Right? So is that an example of the good version of looking through the past?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few really interesting quotes that you're sharing that I'm being reminded of as you talk. One is from Stephen Covey. Covey basically just said, you don't see the world as it is, you see the world as you are. So that would also fit with your past or even specific events or specific people. You don't see that trauma as it is, you see it as you are. And as you evolve, you will see it differently, hopefully. Like that's the goal is that you see it differently. That's what you're describing as reframe. And that is just like imagination is a skill. Interestingly, imagination and creativity are also skills towards your past. And being able to reframe, being able to look at it differently, being able to get lessons from it, even find gratitude in it, and build from it. And so, yeah, that's one important thing. There's another connected quote that says, you don't see the outside world, you only see your own reaction to it. And so, as an example, I can, if I have a painful event, I'm of course going to have a reaction. And that reaction largely is what creates the trauma, is because I had a negative reaction. But you can review that reaction and then you can choose to have a different reaction toward it. And so it is a massive skill to continuously reframe events. And really what that just simply means is looking at it from different angles and choosing. You can't overcome a painful trauma or any form of, failure or just challenging episode of life. You can't just shift out of it on accident. You have to actually actively do it by choice. And so it'll also be true of your future that you have to think about your future and decide things about your future by choice, but you also have to similarly do that with your past and choose to make it meaningful in a certain way, choose to be different as a result, choose to view it as an asset rather than a liability. If it's an asset, then what that means is that event is actually making you better. If it's a liability, then it's making you bitter, right? It's actually making you worse and it's draining you. So I only bring up the past. I know that we're, ultimately sort of talking about future self, but this skill is just as important as becoming flexible in your future. And if you've overly identified with your past self or are believing that the past is determining the present, and there's a lot of research on this. If you believe that the past determines the present, then what that means is that you believe that the present and the future will be predictive because of the past. It's the past driving it all. And why this different approach is a lot more powerful is it's actually the present that shapes the meaning of the past, is that I don't have to be the same person as I was in the past. I already am not that same person, but also I can choose to look at it differently. And also my future can be radically different even than my present. And so it creates a lot more flexibility, both in what's possible in the future, but also in how you feel and in what you can do with your past.
On a really practical level, it's like there are times in our lives that we feel when we look at the past, right? Which is, again, a construct of how we are right now.
It's a view.
Right? It's a view. We see these moments, and let's say somebody's story is that I always try for a goal and I end up failing, right? Especially in their health, right? Which is a lot of my audience cares about health. It's like, I tried to improve my body composition. I tried to work out. And these are these 4 or 5 situations where I said, usually on New Year's, that I was going to get serious about this thing. I set the intention and then I ended up failing. So here are 5, 6, 7 things that I'm telling you, they're real. They're my past. And I didn't end up seeing it through. So that gives me a sense of a lack of confidence. What you're saying is that, look, there's no denying that there was an event that happened.
Indeed.
Right? There was no denying that there was maybe even a goal that ended up happening. But if we're using those and the story we created around them, they're not reality. Reality is, great, you didn't have the right support system. Or reality is there was too many things that you were focused on at that time, which is a big part of your work, right? We're trying to do too much. That's there. Or another aspect that you focus on in your new book, 10x is easier than 2x, is that maybe our goal wasn't big enough. There wasn't a big enough challenge that was there for us. So maybe our time and our schedule and our structure was off. Maybe we weren't connected enough to our future self. So yes, maybe you set a goal and it didn't go the way that you wanted to, but our version of what happened in the past is literally just a story, no different than us reading a storybook to a kid that's a made up imaginative situation.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
What is one way, like practically, like is there an organizational structure? Is there a template?
Sure.
Is there something that you've laid out where somebody can start to have a framework for giving themselves more credit for how the past has gone? Because again, like you mentioned, we might have had a goal like, hey, I have this goal of, being in this particular percentage body composition, or I want to lose this much amount of weight, or I want to become this strong in my life. And I feel like I didn't achieve it, right? But they don't see the fact that at least they're regularly working out 1 day a week now. And before they were doing nothing. At least now they're walking more often. So is there a framework for capturing those and giving ourselves credit and almost like patting ourselves in the back and saying, look, you actually are doing way more than you think you are?
Yeah, there's a few frameworks I'll give you. Dan Sullivan and we wrote 10x is easier than 2x. We wrote an entire book on this topic called The Gap and the Gain. But one thing that I think is really powerful with this idea is, as people, our habits are most solidified by what we do at night. So there's generally a conversation about what you do for that first hour of the day is the most important hour, and it sets the tone. But the truth is that when it comes to the habits and the identity that you're developing, it's actually what you do during the last hour of your day. It's what you do right before bed, right before going into sleep, which is where your brain does so much work when you're asleep. When you're asleep, your brain is literally like reorganizing your new knowledge. It's also getting rid of knowledge that no longer matters. It's really building an identity and building memories and building a new framework for reality, your worldview. And so what you do right before bed has huge impacts. And 90% of people, research shows, is they're looking at their phone for like the last 10 minutes of the day, literally procrastinating sleep, which is setting up your future self the next day for disaster. And so rather than putting more and more information into your head at night, it's a lot better to output. Output's a lot more creative. And in really basic terms, when I say output, I'm just saying, like it would be good with a journal, just because your phone has so many other uses that even if you just put the notes on your phone,
too easy to get distracted.
It's too easy to have some ping ding, and it has too many uses. And so if you just had a notebook, and there's a lot of research on this, but I'm going to give you a different framework. But a lot of the research shows if you just simply wrote down 3 things you were grateful for from that day, this is like 101 gratitude. it forces you to, and you give yourself no more than 5 minutes. So like give yourself a 5-minute timer and don't do this for more than 5 minutes. Just let it click and then be done. But with the gratitude piece, and I'll share with you different frameworks that I've found to be more useful than this, but with the gratitude one, first off, research does show if you just sat and wrote down 3 things you were grateful for from that day, you will not only be objectively happier, but you will sleep better as a whole. And those 2 things are really powerful. The reason it's powerful is because by simply giving yourself 3 to 5 minutes to think about it, most people, again, don't, because they're just inputting and then they go to bed and then they've got to deal with the stresses of tomorrow by just simply thinking about the day. I ask my kids as an example, what are 3 things you're grateful for from today? Their first initial reaction is nothing. But again, if you just sit and think, then it forces you to analyze a day. Again, re-look at the past from the lens of gratitude. What could I be grateful for? Or what may have gone well? That's just looking at it from a lens, from a filter, from an angle. And what people will find is, oh, you know what? Actually, that person was nice to me, or you will find things to be grateful for. Now, to answer your question, the framework that I find to be really useful, one of them is what I told you before, which is how am I different from who I was 24 hours ago? So at the end of my day, again, no more than 5 minutes, I could just ask myself, how am I different from who I was last night when I went to bed? And if I actually think about it, again, I'm choosing a lens to look at my day and the experiences of my day. Maybe nothing went to plan. Maybe I was terrible on my diet, but I may, the current version of me, have a lot more motivation than I did yesterday because now I know that I could do better, or I really want to, or maybe I know a few things that my past self didn't know, or maybe I had a few wins. So I think it's really valuable for one, just this is an identity one. It's just recognizing the difference. A more basic thing you could do is just simply write down, 1 to 3 wins you had for the day. So what are 1 to 3 things that I consider wins, whether it's just an achievement I had, a great experience I had, or some form of learning. And just by doing that, then you're starting to kind of build a useful, powerful past that has a lot of value, and over time that can make you confident. One thing you could do as well, and this surprises people because way more happens over a period of time than we acknowledge because we're so measuring ourselves against our future that we don't realize how much is happening. I actually did this with my team recently where I said, I want you to just write down all of the major wins, personal and professional, from the last 90 days. I'm like, go back 90 days. Seriously, just do it. And they thought about it and they're like, oh my goodness, I can't even believe how much has happened in the last 90 days. I'm completely shocked. You go back a year, a lot of things have happened. And if you just actually make the list, what are the actual significant things that have happened in the last year? How am I different from my past self? It's actually, I guarantee for your listeners, especially if they're listening to your podcast, they are doing more than they think. And by just simply writing it down, it doesn't need to take a long time. I would say on a weekly basis, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, on the weekend. On a daily basis, take 3 to 5 minutes. Those are just good, simple examples of, building that muscle, but also as you do it, what you focus on, you create more of. As you start to see more evidence of wins, even in over a 24-hour period of time, you'll start to propel and want more for the future. You'll start to be a lot more thoughtful in designing the future and stacking more wins.
What I love about that, and thank you, that was so articulate, right? 3 things that you're grateful for.
Sure.
How have I different in the last 24 hours?
How am I different from my past self?
How am I different than my past self? And even in the 90 days component. And this really goes towards this larger thing, which is that most people speak to themselves and treat themselves so much harsher than they would treat anybody. If somebody was talking, I don't have kids yet, but I can imagine if somebody was talking the way you talk to yourself, if somebody was talking to your kids that way,
it'd be a very toxic, unhealthy relationship.
And you would probably end up jail because you would kill that person. If somebody was talking to your partner that way, your husband, your wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, if somebody was talking to your parents that way, we would never let them. And yet we talk to ourselves that way. And partly it's because we're not putting in the work of acknowledging these moments and seeing the receipts of all the work that we're putting in. And another part of it is when we let any form of media, that could be traditional media, that could be social media, run the narrative in our head, and we're already feeling a sense of lack because we have not acknowledged how much progress we've made, even in the last 24 hours. We're not giving ourselves gratitude. We're not patting ourselves on the back. Our brain is primed to see what's wrong with me. This person has it. This person's making more money. This person has an amazing house. This person's getting fit. I guess I'm just not good enough. Well, you'll come to that conclusion if you don't acknowledge how powerful you've been in the last 24 hours and all the simple things that you can be grateful for.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, we train our worldview. We train our reference points. A reference point is something you're measuring yourself against. And we're trained in public education to compete against other people, to, I'm trying to get the highest grade or whatnot. Social media amplifies this. And so we have generally all these external reference points. And what this process is that we're describing of referencing yourself backwards, actually measuring your progress, acknowledging it. First off, it helps you see that you're not the same person you were before and that you're in a state of growth. You also are framing your past in a way where you're acknowledging your progress. This develops more of an internal referencing system where it actually eventually starts leading to you stop worrying so much about what other people think about your life, your progress, your opinion of your own progress, your opinion of your own past, as well as your own goals for the future is a lot. It matters more than what other people think. And so what I have found in doing this is that doing this more regularly gets me more connected to myself, to my own progress, to my own distance traveled. And then I stop worrying so much about those external reference points, those external voices, and I start actually playing my own game of life, which is very individual. Like my own goals are going to be different from the person right next to me's, and my own experiences are going to be very different. And so now, because I'm having more of an internal referencing system, and I'm actually looking at my past from a useful perspective, I'm framing my past as very useful, very valuable. Now my future becomes a lot more intrinsically motivating. I start going for the goals that I genuinely want, irrespective of what other people think, rather than doing what I think I need in order to be worthy because I have an unhealthy view of my past, or trying to do what I think I need because I'm competing and comparing with everyone else. And you stop operating from those unhealthy attachments, those unhealthy needs with all these external reference points, and all of that noise fades away. And now you've got like way more self-awareness. You start pursuing things that you genuinely want, regardless of external opinions. And you just start pursuing your own race of life, and you develop your own meaning for your past along the way. And it just becomes a lot more of a healthy cycle, a lot more of an enjoyable cycle. And then, it also leads you to being a lot more celebratory to other people as well. You help other people see their own progress. Help them, because if you're in the, using the language of Dan in the book, if you're in the gap where you're always measuring yourself against externals with yourself, you're also going to do that with other people. If I'm always seeing where I could have been better and where I was not as good as I could have been, I can promise you I'm doing that with my friends or with my boss or with my kids or my coworkers. And as a parent, I catch myself doing that all the time, where I'm like, I'm not acknowledging my kid's progress, is all I'm saying is, why didn't you do better? And so I'm drilling into his head that he's never enough as well. And so I think it's huge.
I shared something on social media a few years ago, and it was paraphrasing here, but it was like, in my experience, the most hypercritical individuals. And again, it's not like this outwardly thing where we're constantly going to people or picking on the waiter or this. It could even be just in life. You're going, oh, why did they do this way? Or, oh my gosh, the traffic is so much right now. It's like all these little things, or why is it, it's this criticism approach to the world. The most hypercritical people are usually the most unhappiest people, because you cannot be, going back to your point, extremely critical to the external world and not have that same critical lens that you've trained not be directed towards you. In fact, it starts with you, and then you start projecting it outwards. And the flip side of that is gratitude is the antidote. And when we step into gratitude and we see that not only we are trying our best, which means that other people are, and that doesn't mean that you don't tell people when you have feedback for them. It doesn't mean that you don't have kind candor, that you can be very direct, but you can be kind in the process. And you say, hey, this doesn't work for me anymore, and I would like it to be done this way. And so it's not about not giving feedback. It's not about not presenting criticism. It's not about all those things. It's about leading with gratitude and the sort of benefit of the doubt first with ourselves, and then we can project it. And it's kind of the idea that once you do that, that starts to unlock your ability to tap more into your future self. So now, through imagination, because you have these receipts, you can literally dream up your biggest, most beautiful life. And now it's a matter of, using the 10X approach, which I'd love you to break down, because the second part that you said at the beginning of the interview was people don't pick big enough goals, and sometimes that holds them back. So is the framework that I've laid it out, that we start with gratitude, that starts to squash the criticism, we're building up the receipts, that's allowing us to be understanding that our present, our past is not our reality. We're more connected to the future. Now we feel more confident, and it's like, okay, what's the next thing that we want to do and create in our life? What's the biggest dream we can imagine?
Yeah. So we'll absolutely share kind of the 10X framework, which hopefully we can even dive more into because it's super practical.
Yeah, let's take that framework and let's apply it to the world of health. How do we make the distinction between going for things that are essentially, I'm hearing you say, like are super stretch goals, right?
Sure.
You're not telling somebody who's 5'4" and 60 years old that the goal, if the impossible, is that they want to play in the NBA sometime in the next 5 years,
Sure.
right? That's not what you mean by impossible.
Agreed.
Right? That might be what I would call delusional.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there is a distinction between impossible and delusional. So let's even first start there, because I want to apply what you were talking about kind of to the world of health. Some of my sort of research in the world of, and when I say research, I'm not a researcher like you, just my own readings and learnings, is that we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in a month, and we underestimate what we can accomplish in a year. And when it comes to something like strength training, which has been a big pocket of conversation, adding lean muscle mass, which is something that I only got serious about doing and never really kind of consistently was doing strength training in my life until I turned 40, which was a year ago, is that sometimes I would see people, and I was even the younger version of me, that would say, I'm going to be ripped. I'm going to put on, 15 pounds of muscle in the next 3 months, right? That was kind of like, that was the way that I would approach it. I didn't have a lot of the kind of things in order. I wasn't connected in my future self. I didn't have the right team. A lot of the stuff that we talked about before, right? And then another component, which is, well, what if instead of that being the goal, what if the goal was, hey, I'm going to be consistent about working out and just hitting my goal of strength training X times amount a week, tracking my calories and auditing sort of the stuff that I'm up to. And I'm going to look back a year from now, and even though it feels like I've only made a little bit of progress, I'm going to notice a significant change in my body, right? So I guess the question is, when you're taking some of these ideas of 10Xing is easier than 2X and you're applying them to health and the sort of human body, is there some sort of framework that we have to operate in? And if we go too fast too soon, could we end up burning out in the process?
Here's how I'd look at it is, as we show in the book and as we show in the model, if you're going to go for 2X growth, or let's say a linear realistic goal, right? And that's the whole idea, is 2X is a metaphor. It's the idea of going for something linear, something reasonable, something that's a clear continuation of what you're doing right now. What that means is that you can keep 80% of who you are. You can keep 80% of your strategy. If you want to double your income, or if you want to double, go for some form of marginal improvement, you don't have to change that much. You can keep 80% of your current approach, 80% of your current diet, 80% of your current workout routines, right? You don't have to change that much. You only need to tweak it 20%, which will get you there. And so this is, again, a clear evidence of that approach is taking the past and present and using it as the guide for the future, which is non-creative, non-imaginative, and it's a bad filter. It's in my mind, it's not useful. It's not effective, nor is it empowering to use the present as the filter for the future. It's far more powerful to use the future that you want as the filter for the present. And that gets you into the idea of getting connected to your future self and letting your future self dictate the best decisions for here and now. So that's one. The idea of 10X is actually the opposite. And as we show, if you're going to go for 10X, or if you're going to go for a really big goal, maybe a goal that you maybe feel is impossible, because the goal is so big, most of the things you're doing right now won't get you there. The goal is too big. Like I use my son, Caleb, as an example. Caleb's a tennis player. He's 15 years old. If he wants to play college tennis, where we live in Orlando, there are literally hundreds of coaches, hundreds of programs that could potentially get him there. There's a lot of potential pathways. But if he really wanted to go pro, which in his case is probably unrealistic, the reason it's useful as a tool, using the goal as a tool rather than being attached to it, using it as a filtering tool, is that if he really wanted to go for pro, rather than there being hundreds of potential options in Orlando, it cuts down to maybe one or two realistic coaches that could actually give him a real shot to getting there. So this goes to the idea of bigger goals, say 10x goals. Almost nothing you're doing right now would get you there. And so it actually allows you to look at your life from that 80-20 principle and say 80% of what you're doing right now would not get you to the goal. And so only a few things that you're doing really would. And to go 10x, you actually focus on those 20% of things that matter, and you get 10 times better at those. It's fundamentally about quality, not quantity, in all things. And so this is, I think, and I would be interested in how you would apply this to health, but my view is if you went for the higher goal, it would force you to filter most of what you're doing right now and acknowledge that most of it's actually not very additive. A lot of it's distractive. Like a lot of it's actually taking you the wrong way, but a lot of what you're doing, whether it's the information you're consuming, even the workouts you're doing, or the ways you're approaching it, most of it would fit in that 80% camp that is not going to get you to the goal. And so if you've got a really high goal, it's going to force you to find those few things, those few pathways, that 20% of things that really matters. And back to the idea of you'll stop operating from the assumptions of your past. Maybe you'll go and find new information, new teachers, new coaches, or new approaches that have way higher upside. And so that's my idea is and it also fits with raising the floor, that as you let go of the 80%, you're actually raising your floor. You're stripping out a lot of the things that don't matter, and you're just focusing on quality. Focus on the few things that will have huge impact. So I don't know, what's your take on that and how you would apply that?
No, I wholeheartedly believe in that. And I try to do that in my life. And I remind my audience that you don't need to listen to every podcast that's out there, myself included. You don't have to listen to every episode. You don't have to listen to everything. Every person that comes on this podcast has a different point of view. There's sort of universal field theory in a way that describes their approach to life. And that thing has maybe worked for them and their audience. And your job is which one of them resonates with you for where you are right now and is going to help you achieve and unlock the goals and dreams that you're working on. So often by pulling back a little bit, by focusing on the core basics and identifying what those basics are, not having to get everything right, every supplement, everything, and this person's talking about this food and that, the core basics. And often in our world, those core basics are, number one, for many people, it's just focusing on their sleep is one of those core basics that so many things in your life will 10x with your health just by dialing in.
That's deep in the 20%.
Yeah.
Like the 20% of things that really matter.
The 20% of the things that really matter.
Yeah. If you can improve sleep by 2 or 3%, you're going to get absurd upside.
Right. And that 80% that you might be cutting out on that would actually maybe even support it is like, great, there's always new documentaries on health. There's always some new podcast or some new video, but maybe you don't have to watch them all. Maybe you don't have to watch them all and stay up late and do that. Maybe instead we're going to be a little bit more adhering to a great sleep schedule, maximize that so that you wake up and feel like you are ready to rock the day. When you have great sleep, you are so ready to give love and attention to everything that matters. And of course, we've done plenty of episodes. We'll link them below about some of the impediments to sleep and all the things like that and all the hacks that the sleep experts have. We'll link to that. The next one for a lot of people that we've really doubled down on in the last year and a half on our podcast is strength training. No matter what age you are, some resistance training, at least 3 times a week, not for the vanity aspect of it, but first and foremost, what it does to your brain.
I know.
I did a workout right before I came here, and there were so many little things that were on my mind about what didn't go right, what didn't do that. And I do my gratitude. I actually use, a buddy of mine has this book that he created called the 5-Minute Journal.
Oh yeah.
And I'll use that. It's a great framework. Alex
Totally.
and Mimi Icon. The company's called Intelligent Change. We'll link to in the show notes. But this morning, I had a little bit of a moment of friction, right? There was something that came up and I was ruminating on it. I was thinking about it and I just showed up to my workout, even though there was a part of me that felt like, oh man, I have to focus on other things? Do I really need to be working out now? Got in my workout, lifted heavy weights, and I felt fantastic. And afterward, I was almost reconnected to my future self.
100%.
And I wasn't distracted from this momentary point of thing. So sleep, working out, right? We've covered the in-depths. I won't go into them all, but eating enough protein, right? Eating enough fiber, these basics that are there that don't sound so sexy, But those are those 20% of things
that really make the difference.
that make the difference. And it requires us to cut out the noise so that we can leave room for that. It feels that a big part of your clarity was also getting quiet enough to be able to step into gratitude in that sense of quieting the distraction, taking things out. So you mentioned gratitude walk, right? And typically this was something that you were doing early in the morning, is my guess, or like early in the day.
Oh, very early.
Right? Because it's how you start
First
the
thing
day
in the morning.
Sets the tone for the rest of the day. Right? How you start the morning sets the tone for the rest of the day. What is an example of something else that you were bringing into your life to help you get into a place where you're on that journey towards oneness?
Meditation and mindfulness was instrumental in my journey. See, you have to understand how thoughts work. The more you have a lot of thoughts, you have clutter. And that clutter is what lowers your state of mind, a lot of thought. If I drew 2 circles, one with 3 dots and one with 1,000 dots, which mind will perform at a higher level? Which mind will be happier? Which mind will have more peace? The one with just a few dots, not the one with 1,000. The 1,000 dots is a lower state of mind. The few dots is a higher state of mind. When you have a higher state of mind, you have more clarity, more focus, more positivity. A lot of clutter, a lot of fear, worry, anxiety, and doubt. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I think the follow-up question that a lot of people are thinking is like, where do you think these even come from in the first place?
All right.
Right. Like where do negative thoughts come from? Right. You said yourself, are we choosing them? Nobody would sit down and say, I want to choose to beat myself up today, even though it might look like, people sometimes self-sabotage. Nobody's choosing that on purpose. So where is that negativity coming from? What do you believe?
So there is a world of duality. And if there's light, there's dark. If there's good, there has to be evil. If you look at Harry Potter, what is Harry Potter about? Good versus evil. Star Wars is about good versus evil. Wonder Woman, good versus evil. Black Panther, good versus evil. Superman, good versus evil. So in the space and the absence between man and women and God, the space, that's where evil could exist. When you are one with God, when you're one with your source, one connection, evil can't come in. The minute there's separation, there's a gap, then evil can come into the gap. In a world of duality, there's going to be some separation because it's not like you're one. You experience moments of oneness. We've all been in the zone. You feel like time stops. And let me go back to a tree that's planted in the soil. It's meant to be planted there to grow, to thrive. You put a fish into water. It's meant to be in there to thrive. It can't survive outside the water. We are meant to be connected to our Creator. We were not meant to be separate. Again, this is my belief, but we are not meant to be separated from our Creator. We're meant to be one. Spiritual people say source. Christians will say one with God, right? Jews believe they were here. Again, my mom was Jewish. Jews believe, there's a Creator that created them and they're part of God's creation. I believe we're all part of creation. We're not here by accident, or else we wouldn't have meaning. We wouldn't have a purpose. It would all be an accident. It would all be randomness. So we're meant to be connected. And when we're separated from our Creator and we're disconnected, that's when we start to feel separate. And it's also when negativity could start coming in. And that's our journey through life. This is the curriculum of this life. This is the narrative of this universe, is that there's a battle going on between good versus evil. Because why would negative fits exist even in the first place? Now, people will argue, you'll have evolutionary folks that will say they come from survival, that you have negative thoughts because you have to notice there are tigers coming your way and you have to survive them. They come from making sure that
negativity bias,
you may not have food, so I've got to make sure I go take care of my garden so I'll have food to live. Okay, great. I will give them that. But that's a different kind of negativity than the thoughts that say you're not enough, that you don't have what it takes, that your future's hopeless, that this painting is not great. None of that has any evolutionary purpose to it whatsoever. Those are thoughts that attack you in the place of your identity, of who you are. And that's a spiritual notion. Even the ideal of greatness is actually, where did the ideal of greatness come from? Like, not like the top of the tribe, but there's an essence of greatness, of striving. Why do we paint? Why are we artists that are creating? Why do we care about any of that? That doesn't have any evolutionary purposes whatsoever. It's what it means to be a spiritual soul living in a physical body. And we're here to imagine. We were imagined to imagine, created to create. We are here to create futures. We're here, as my friend Erwin McManus says, we are here to create, I believe, destinies. We're here to create our lives, inventions, paintings, buildings, sculptures, art, music. All of that is acts of creation that is more tuned to a spiritual person than an actual fleshly being trying to survive and escape from the tiger. So I believe that there is an existence of some negative thoughts that are about survival, but the things that I'm talking about have nothing to do with survival. They all have to do with negative thoughts that come in that attack you and your ability to be happy, your ability to actually move towards your destiny, to live your purpose, to be who you're meant to be. And that's because you're a soul. You're a soul with a physical body. And so you're soul and spirit with a physical body. And when you die, your body turns to dust. But what are we living? An energetic reality. We all agree, science says we are energetic beings. So we're living this energetic reality. How do we see the world? Through vibrations and frequencies, spectrums, and then there's signals that are interpreted by the brain, language, images, all energetic. It's an antenna. So we're seeing this world literally through an energetic reality, but we're like a soul and a spirit, not like we are a soul and spirit that is now expressing ourselves, our unique expression. Drew, this is your unique expression, your unique soul living this reality and expressing it in this energetic reality. And guess what? When you die, the energetic body that seems physical turns to dust, which lets you know your energy, lets me know I'm energy. And then from there, but what lives on? Your spirit and soul, which is eternal. And that eternal soul comes here on earth to live a purpose, to have a destiny, to go through this journey, like the hero's journey. And along the way, negative thoughts are coming in to sabotage you on the journey. So that's a long answer, but that's where I believe they come from. And when I share with younger people and they see, wow, that makes so much sense. Because why would I have a negative thought in the first place about my life, about my homework, about my future, about who I am as a person, about what I'm going to create. My son right now just graduated from college. I'm having a lot of anxiety about my future, Dad. Why would that give him a sense of anxiety about his future? So those are all places that we get attacked in. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think it brings up this larger point, which is that you're not just talking about, and this is not to minimize it, but you're not just talking about just belief. Right. There's a lot of people out there that have belief for their relationship with a higher power. Yeah. But there's a little component of a missing component of action and practice. And of course, what I'm hearing from you, correct me if I'm wrong, is you're talking about the combination of both of those, right? You can believe a lot of different things. People believe all around the world different things, but it's, do those beliefs match with actions that take you towards love and oneness?
So good. So here's the deal. So I want to be honest. I'm a person of faith.
Yeah.
So
I think everybody got that.
Right. but most Christians don't talk this way and don't see the world this way. Like I see the world through the world of an energetic reality as well.
Yeah, which is very new in Christianity.
Yeah, and then we have an antenna. I'm not sure I might be excommunicated if you could be excommunicated. I don't know. I'm not big on religion, I should say.
Well, by the way, you also said something interesting, which would have gotten you excommunicated like 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago, which is that you believe in a soul.
Yes.
For the modern interpretation and sort of that time of Christianity, is there was actually not a recognition of a soul.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. There's a really great couple books that I've read on this sort of history. Like even back in the day, Christians didn't believe in that you die and go to heaven.
Right.
You die and your body remains in the ground until Jesus comes back on earth, resurrection happens, and then everybody, and that's a big part of why there was this history in Christianity of not being an organ donor or like being buried with your pets or being buried with your wife or being buried with your possessions, because when Jesus would come back to the earth, then everybody, would be resurrected and you would need all those things that were there in heaven. So just saying a little bit of history context that
beliefs can change.
And that there's I'm hearing a spiritual, you have your beliefs and I celebrate them. I'm hearing a spiritual core essence with your unique relationship that is your connection with oneness.
Yes.
Right. And then it's matched with the Christian tradition.
Right.
Right. Well, within that belief set.
Technically, but here's what I wrote in The One Truth. Truth is truth. and you'll find it everywhere.
Yeah.
And so the truth doesn't need the Bible to exist.
Yeah, I heard you mention that.
It already exists. It's basically the Bible, though, that explains the truth of oneness, actually.
Yeah, that's
more
what
than
you
anything.
feel.
Yeah, because if you look at the Old Testament, that's a story of separation. Adam and Eve in the garden is a story of separation because they believed the lie. They ate of the fruit. They basically were separated from each other and from God relationally. And if you look at society, we see that happening all the time. We see relationally we're being separated from each other and spiritually being separated. The New Testament is basically the prescription or the solution to the separation and how to restore people back to oneness. But as I wrote the book, I had asked myself, okay, if that's the case, then why are so many Christians struggling with their mental health? Why are so many Christians depressed? Why are so many Christians not living like the teachings or what they believe in the teachings of Jesus? And what you realize is, as you said just a minute ago, it's about practice. It's about implementing. And what I realize is that if we're spirit and soul, as a Christian, what happens is you then, in your belief, for instance, in Jesus, you're saved, right? You believe in a savior, you're saved, but your soul still needs healing. So your spirit's saved, but your soul still needs healing. Your soul is still encumbered by the patterns of the past, by the wounds of the past. Your mind and soul are what govern the body and brain. So you have this mind and soul, the software, the operating system. And you can be saved in the spirit, but your soul still needs to be healed. And if it's not, you're going to be saved, go into heaven, but act like you're living in hell and feel like you're living in hell. And that's what happens so often. So what I share is we've got to spend each day bathing in the spirit. If you took a cucumber and you put it into pickle juice and you dumped it in once and pulled it back out, would it be transformed? No. That's baptism. Like they get baptized in the water and then boom, I'm baptized. You've been saved, but it's not transformed. You must bathe your soul in the pickle juice to be transformed, to be pickled. The renewing of your mind that's talked about in the Bible, that Paul talked about. Don't be conformed by the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. What is the renewing? Every day meditating, every day praying, every day going through the healing process that heals your soul, the hole in your soul to become whole, W-H-O-L-E, to become one with the God that created you, that loves you. Here's another thing. Relational psychology says that we heal in a loving relationship. Great. Okay. Now they're wondering, can you heal with a higher power? Okay. Can you heal with a stranger? No. There has to be love there. So you can't really heal with a stranger. If the higher power is a stranger, you can't heal. And that's the argument for a personal God, a God of love that loves you.
Yeah.
That loves you and wants to share love, that is love and you are love. And when you connect love to love, that's the wholeness, that's the oneness, that's the spirit to spirit. And so real healing takes place when we are able to receive love. I was a big time New Ager. I was a Buddhist, studied for years. Buddhism, it led me onto a very spiritual path. It's part of my journey and my history, and I'm proud of it. But I know this, you can't heal with a stranger. You can't heal with a higher power that's a stranger, because it certainly didn't work for me. And self-love is not enough, because self-love, we all fall short because we're not perfect and we're not God. And so the minute you try to heal with self-love, it's like trying to heal my own cut. I can't heal it.
Yeah, I want to chime in. There's a Reverend Michael Beckwith here in Los Angeles. He runs the Agape Center. I don't know if you've come across him.
I met him years ago.
One of my favorite quotes of his is that, God made man in his own image.
Okay.
And man has been trying to repay the favor ever since.
That's good.
There is this oneness. There's many people that listen to this podcast. So, okay, great. Some come from a Christian background. They're going to resonate immediately with what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have you on here because these truths can be applied to people, and the action is there regardless of what background is there. And I totally celebrate, thank you for speaking up for your background that you come from. But going back to Reverend Michael Beckwith's quote is that I think the challenge that a lot of people have of certain interpretations when people only see God from their unique vantage point, which is nothing wrong with that, is there's often the humanification of God. People want to take this thing, which is source, all-knowing, all-being, oneness, and they want to put human traits on it.
Yes.
And so they put anger and they put this and they put that on God. When God is love, God is oneness. And some people might have the word universe. They might have some other things, source you mentioned. And I think that more as the world continues to grow in both positive and negative ways, right? And the free floating of ideas, I think that one thing that shows up is that there's these flowering of people. You know, I consider you as being one of them. Yeah. People who are speaking up and saying, here's what I believe, here's my background, here's what I'm stepping into. And also too, none of that gives any sort of excuse that we're going to lessen, lower, or put other people.
Yes.
You can have beliefs.
Yes.
And I can have my beliefs, but I'm not using those beliefs to make anybody lesser.
Yes.
And this is not just happening in religion. We're seeing it in everything.
In everything.
We saw it during the COVID pandemic. We saw this with this side versus, this side. Oh, everybody who chooses not to get a medical intervention, they're lesser than. We're not going to treat them as human beings if they decide to have medical autonomy or whatever it might be. We see this in health with battles that people have. So I feel, even though that you can look online and you can find it, the news, another Reverend Michael Beckwith quote is, you turn on the news, it's the expression of the lowest common denominator of the human experience. You go looking for it, you're going to find it. But there's so much more positivity in the world that we just do not see. Does not get amplified. So I think as society is waking up, and it takes the negativity to do that, we're seeing more individuals that flower and are sprouting up and saying, we want to step into oneness. And also too, if I have beliefs, these are my beliefs and I'm going to talk about it. And that doesn't mean that I'm here to try to, say that you're lesser than if you don't have those beliefs at this point.
I respect everyone, and I respect where they are on their journey. I respect what their beliefs are. I'm not here to convince anyone of anything. What I am here to share though is a process for healing and restoration, and how to feel and experience the oneness they're looking for. And again, mindfulness and meditation is a part of that path, because the more you can lessen, for instance, the thoughts you have, you'll have less clutter. Your brain, which is an antenna, will start to tune into a higher frequency, and you will start to tune into more of that healing energy and that healing voice. I believe, again, it goes back to, why are we here? What is our existence for? Are we here by accident? I think most people believe we're here for a reason, but I also believe most people will actually realize that they have a wound in their soul and a hole in their soul. And we've gone through life where we feel like something's missing, where we know something's wrong. We know we're missing something. We know we need something. And so often it's a relationship with a God who loves them. And often it's a relationship that was harmful, where people were betrayed in the past, that keeps them from that connection.
Let's talk about that for a quick second. On the podcast that you were here last time, you were talking a little bit about your upbringing.
Yeah.
Do you feel that was part of, your dad was a police officer, constantly in fight or flight, constantly have to be aware. He is, even his negativity bias is more prone towards negativity, because that's a lot of the sort of interactions. Police get called when shit hits the fan. So they get involved when things are, negative.
And they see the worst in humanity.
They see the worst in humanity, right? They see a lot of good, and they're trying to bring in good, but there's a lot of negativity that they see. And then you chat a little bit about how that sort of shaped his life and how he loved division. He saw the division. But do you feel like that's where a little bit of your wounds come from? Or do they come from something else?
We all have wounds.
Sure. There's universal wounds.
Do you have one?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I have two main kind of what I call them. I had a mentor. He gave them the nickname in sort of his teaching. His name was Serrano Kelly. He calls them pathetic insecurities.
Okay.
Right? So these core insecurities, which by the way, positive and negative, they also create your strengths. One of the core ones for me was that I believed when I was younger, my family moved around a lot. I was always the new kid. I ended up in a couple situations where I felt like people don't have my back, right? Whether that was my family for not intervening, whether that was, new kids that I was meeting who might be, everybody got bullied to some extent when they were a kid, but being in a situation where you felt like, oh, I'm not fitting in, or I'm being bullied. So I would say that was one. Another one actually came from when I was younger. I had really bad dyslexia. Well, actually, I didn't have really bad. I had borderline dyslexia that was getting worse. And I had a teacher that basically was giving me Fs in a particular class and made me go home and sign it. And I didn't take the papers home. And I kept on stuffing, the little desks that we all had when we were in elementary school.
Yeah.
And then finally one day my teacher called my parents and said, your son is not getting these sent to you. And my parents South Asian Indian parents, all about academics.
Right.
They're like, how could you lie to us? And I internalized it as a young kid. And I said,
Okay.
I'm a liar.
Oh, wow.
So those are the two sort of, wounds, I'm sure amongst other spiritual wounds that we're all navigating. But yeah, those are two for me.
Yeah, if you think about it, why do we all have wounds? What are wounds? But a separation. A wound is a separation.
Okay, let's zoom out a little bit.
If you have an injury on your arm,
Yeah.
there's a cut. Separation. You went from wholeness to separation through a wound.
Yeah. So now even going even a little bigger, because we're jumping around. We'll come back to
Boom,
a
boom,
few
boom, boom.
things.
That's good.
So even within that, right, part of a little bit of, the understanding of these wounds is that, first of all, everybody has wounds.
Yep.
And also your core strengths in life often come from the things that wounded you. So are they bad? Are they good? Are they wrong? Are they right? Or are they all part of oneness?
You asked
What are
me
your
about my
thoughts?
personal journey. So for me, I believe my wounds come from one, my father who left when I was a year old, my biological father. So my stepfather was a New York City police officer who raised me
Thanks for clarifying
since
that.
I was 5.
Yeah.
So I was left by my biological father. And again, I'm glad he wasn't the one who raised me because my stepfather was the best and a great dad. And I am who I am in many ways because of him. Taught me a lot about toughness too, to take on the world, even though he started in a very negative way. Funny, my biological father is a psychotherapist and a social worker. So everyone always asks me if I'm a psychologist. I have a natural understanding of psychology. I say I'm not a psychologist, but most of them read my books. So it's very interesting. But I have that natural understanding and I go in that direction in many ways from the genetic standpoint. But I definitely had abandonment issues, I would say, for a long time. And before I started writing, I went up and forgave him for not being a great father, for not being there for me in many ways. Because I would see him on weekends, but he was never really there for me and my brother. And my brother sort of said he had enough with him. But for me, I was still reestablishing connection.
Yeah.
And going up to forgive him. I don't have a great relationship with him. I don't have much of a relationship with him, but I forgave him.
Yeah.
And by doing that, there was a lot of healing that took place from that. Again, you have a wound. The whole point of life is to heal the wound that you have and to take the hole in your soul and make it whole. So I had to, heal that, and forgiveness and love is a big part of that. So extending love, extending forgiveness, that was a huge part of my journey. I started writing after that. I don't believe I would have been able to write if I didn't let go of the old. And that gave me the ability to now create the new as I was moving forward. And that's when my whole journey began, really, in this world of self-development, of leadership, of teamwork, of mindset, came from doing that and going through that. So did it lead to my greatest strength? Yes. Did my negativity? Did my fear? Did that lead to now a source of love and a greater love? Yes. That's the journey of life, to going from negative to positive, separation to oneness. I believe we start out as one, we then get separated, and the whole point of life, the whole journey of life is now going back to oneness.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we can experience and feel those moments of oneness and connection with other people spiritually, that leads to healing and wholeness and happiness and joy. And so wherever you are in the spiritual spectrum, wherever you are in your spiritual beliefs, just know moving from separateness to oneness is where you will find more healing and wholeness and begin the process of making you whole, which is the point of your existence. And as you're whole, WHOLE, you will then find more power and wholeness, whereas separation, there is weakness. To make this real for people, practical,
Yeah.
the word integrity comes from the word integer, which means whole and complete. So someone with integrity has wholeness and completeness. They have oneness. A leader with integrity is powerful because there's no gap between what they say and what they do. A leader who's a narcissist, or if you're married to a narcissist, or you have someone in your family that's a narcissist, the narcissist actually feels separate. The narcissist at the neurological level has cut off other parts of the brain to protect itself because it's experienced trauma. And narcissists in many ways have experienced some sort of trauma that has caused them to feel separated, isolated, and alone. So they feel disconnected. So what do? They focus on self instead of others. And it's about self-preservation. So once you understand this, you can even see how leadership plays out of oneness and separateness. And that person who's feeling separate doesn't care about other people. Again, but mostly because they've been hurt and because they've experienced a wound. And that same narcissist, if you study narcissistic personality disorder, what you'll find is they also report feelings of depression, isolation, aloneness, disconnection. They have same symptoms as many other mental health disorders because they feel separate. Going back to the experience of oneness and separateness. So what we're doing here is we're literally combining in this conversation and in the one truth, the spiritual understanding of who we are with the scientific understanding of what causes mental health disorders. And it's explained not by me, but just in general, when you know the truth too perfectly, and it fits too perfectly to not be part of our existence. And we're trying to separate, just like holistic healing.
Well, let's talk about that for a quick second,
healing.
right? You and I connected a bunch because you are like deep into the world of health, wellness. You had your own, health journey. Your gut was messed up for a long time. Separation. So, the body, especially in modern times, is also being wounded by our modern lifestyle, right? And the body impacts the brain impacts the body. How does that fit into the mix over here as you're thinking about it, and how we have to treat our body like the temple that it is so that our brain and our heart can function the way that it needs to?
So good, because shame and guilt, I often say, is the inflammation of the soul. And when you have shame and guilt and blame, you have this inflammation that keeps you from healing. And
by the way, highly critical people, right, which you've even mentioned before, like you've never met anybody who was super happy, who just happened to be highly critical, right? But also I find that highly critical people they don't feel good. Yeah. They don't feel good in their body. They're not in body. Yeah. And that is another form of separation that's there. So it could be inflammation, it could be blood sugar roller coaster, it could be too much processed food. So yeah, how do you think about the health component as it's related to separateness and oneness?
Going to the critical part, I have to just address that real quick, because when you are critical, it's actually because you feel separate and you don't feel like you have intimacy with other people and connection to other people. So then you start actually rejecting others or criticizing others. It's like traffic in LA. We look at the other person as the cause of our traffic. They look at us as the cause of their traffic.
Sure.
And there was a sign in LA that said, "You are the traffic." So it's understanding that
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, we're all one.
Was that a sign by the by the government, or somebody else put it up?
Someone put it up. It was by Hollywood. You are the traffic, which I thought was a brilliant understanding of we're all one.
Yeah.
We're all one. Once you realize that, I'm not competing with you for that one spot over there on the road, because if I am, I'm separate. But if I'm one with you, I'm not competing. Guess what? You can have that part.
Right.
So inflammation is when there's a disconnection and a lack of healing in the body. And we have all these processed foods. We have all these different stressors. We have these environmental toxins that are actually destroying the natural ecosystem of our body and of our health and our wholeness. And so as a result of that, we get inflammation. And in health, you have to remove the inflammation.
Chronic inflammation.
Yeah, for the body to heal. Chronic inflammation for the body to heal. But if you have chronic inflammation, the body can't heal. So we've got to remove it in order for healing to take place. Same way about removing the shame and the guilt that you feel for healing to take place in your soul and in your mind, which again, not your brain, but your mind. But going back to the body, the more we're doing that, we're creating a disconnection and a separation even within the body where it doesn't function well. What is Chinese medicine all about? It's all about getting the body to flow like a river. And there's blockages. Yeah, qi. There's qi and there's blockages along the way. I've done acupuncture for years. And there's blockages that happen. And those blockages keep you from being connected and whole, causes separation, which causes health issues and disorders. So disease is when the body's not flowing naturally and qi is not flowing. So if you understand how that works, what are all the things that are causing us to feel more separated and more disconnected in our body? And the more we infuse our body and our brain with these toxins that are destroying us, literally, then we don't feel as good. And our brain, which is an antenna, then gets damaged. And then you start connecting to, I believe, lower frequency, negative thoughts, more fear-based thoughts, which is the thoughts that bring you down and divide you versus the thoughts that uplift you. Think about when you think positive thoughts, how they uplift you. Think about how it uplifts you when you feel joy. Think about how encouragement uplifts you. Think about all of that makes you feel one and connected to other people versus the thoughts that make you feel disconnected. I believe it starts in many ways. Again, it goes two ways. It's the mind, the soul, the battle there that could lead to effects in your body. So again, what we're thinking the body is hearing, right? The body's receiving what we say. So the body does listen. But I also believe our body and our brain, when they're not operating correctly, will then start to have an effect on the energy you're putting forth and putting out. And that affects everything else as well.
There's nothing wrong with being any particular way. The challenge is it getting you the results that you want in life? And part of that is this quote from the book again. What is the story you're telling yourself? That's the identity. And we all have stories that we're telling ourselves. The only challenge is the vast majority of us don't realize, hey, that's a story. That's one version of the truth. I'm a huge fan of Byron Katie's work. And in her work, she has this whole methodology it's literally called The Work, where she has you question a painful thought that you have about yourself or someone else or some situation that people literally believe is true. And then she puts you in a situation, you can Google it online. I love watching, people going through this process. Jenny McCarthy, speaking of Jim Carrey, one of his ex-wife, she produced a whole documentary on The Work about Byron Katie, and she narrates it. And you can watch it free online. And she has people run alternative stories that could potentially be true. Let's say you and I are close friends and you end up canceling on me last minute for something. And that is a painful thought. It accumulates, and over a period of time, I'm like, Rob doesn't care about me. That's my belief that I have. And that belief, literally a tiny thing like that adds up over years, are things that create wedges between two people who could be family, partner, whatever, friends, and literally conflict. Wars have been started over little miscommunications like that add over a period of time. So in my head, I have all these series of stories that make up my identity that have become Rob doesn't care about me. And then The Work, and obviously there's multiple methodologies. You talk about a lot of them. We'll get to some of them inside of this. But in Byron Katie's work, it's like, okay, what's another potential truth? Because the thing is as much as you think that you know the truth, you can't possibly know the full truth from that person's perspective. Maybe there's something that I did at some point in time that you're holding on to. Maybe you're busy. Maybe you're going through so much turmoil in your family that you don't have the capacity to give attention to your friends at this moment right now because you're barely surviving. All those things are alternative realities. It's just that we tend to think that our version of the truth, our story, as you say, is the truth. But you can either be right or really what the book is about is you can get results.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Can I speak to that? That's
Please.
Actually, you said a lot of really good stuff there. So one of the things I think is important, and I say this to people when I coach them, is because what you're really trying to do is you're trying to just change your perception on something. That's all that is. We have this viewpoint, this myopic viewpoint of like, this is the way that reality is, and this is the way that I see it. But I live a completely different reality than you do because of all of the things that you've had happen in your life. And every single person you'll ever meet has a completely different reality that they're living in based off of their stories. And I'm less concerned with what people do in their life. I'm more concerned with like the stories they're telling themselves in their head all day long. And so the going back to what you're saying about like, is there another reality? One thing that I always say to people, because I was like, it's so hard for me to see the other reality. I said, okay, imagine this. Imagine you're on the debate team and you now know your viewpoint, right? Now, what I want you to do is I want you to go to the other side and I want you to debate yourself and imagine what else could be happening. Like you're saying, like one of the triggers, I actually had this not this exact conversation, but I was talking with when I was on Aubrey Marx's podcast last year. We were talking about one of the things that triggers us because we both have like father wounds is when we will text a friend that's a guy specifically, not even much with a woman, and we don't hear back from like a day or so. Because then we start going this conversation in our head of like, they don't give a shit about me. They don't care. They must be, they're too big for me now. And it's like this whole story will start going. And then you got to stop the story in the middle of in the middle of it and go, okay, I'm feeling kind of anxious right now. Like, why am I feeling this way? Okay. Feeling this way because I texted him a little while ago. I haven't heard back in a couple hours. I'm thinking to myself, he must be too busy. Maybe he's hanging out with more famous people or more popular people than me right now, whatever it is that it might be. And then you realize like, oh yeah, he's also got like 100-person company. So maybe he is busy throughout the day. And it's like you're saying, it's like literally challenging your actual thoughts. And that's what they say in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is test the validity of your thoughts. When you notice a thought that makes you feel not good, whatever that not good is, stressed, sad, anxious, test the validity of it and be like, does this hold weight? Or is like, am I just building an entire story, this huge, house of cards on quicksand, and this thing can just fall if I just immediately ask questions that are correct. And so, or on the opposite side of that. And so I do think what you're saying is actually super important. People understand is like, whenever you notice yourself be triggered in some way, is there possibly another viewpoint that I can look through that can make me see like, yeah, maybe they'll text me a little bit later. Maybe she, a lot of people who have been like cheated on in the past, I've heard, they will get into a relationship with the next person and they'll text them all day long, and they're going out with their friends and they're like, where are you going? Why are you not texting me in the next hour? And they ruin the next relationship because of they're squeezing too tight on this relationship because they're placing a story from an old relationship into a new relationship. So it's like, how can we just be a little bit aware of our thoughts, our identities, the stories that we're telling ourselves in our head, and just be like, is there maybe another viewpoint? And 99% of the time, there's like 40 other viewpoints of what could be other possibilities.
It's an important message because when I read your book and I go through your content, I think about this is all about getting and reclaiming agency in life.
Right.
Most of us are responding to events in our day. We're responding to the media. If you wake up and you watch the morning news or TV, or that's somebody else's agenda for what's important in the day, might be helpful. Oftentimes, it's usually a list of the worst things that are going on in the world. So that's going to put you in a particular mood in the day. If you are planning your day out by primarily responding to email, that's again, other people's priorities. Of course, we all have to do email, but if you're not taking space for yourself to create agency and say, what do I want? Which is actually one of the most scariest questions for people. A lot of times people feel like, you know what? If I'm being honest with myself, I don't know what I want. And that's scary, but I know that I want something different.
Yeah.
And if you create more space in your life, if you start to question these stories, if you address your fear, which we're going to get to in a second, you have your whole first chapter is about fear, you can now create a little bit more space between stimulus of the world and your response. And now you can choose your identity, choose how you want to show up, which literally can transform your future. Right? That to me is what I got from
and it's
what
like,
the book is
it's
about.
like, just try it on for a day. Try being somebody else for a day and just see how it works. Like, it's like, I'm wearing a black shirt right now. I just decided to pick this out, but I was wearing a gray shirt earlier and I was like, oh, you know what? I like this new black shirt. I'll wear this instead. But it's like, why don't you just wake up and be like, you know what? I'm going to be outgoing today. Just see how it works. See how people respond to me. Because as I change, people, it's like the phrase, like, if you wake up and you meet an asshole, you just met an asshole. But if you wake up and meet assholes all day long, you're the asshole. It's like everybody responds to you differently based off of how you show up. And so it's like, what if I just decide when I go to Starbucks and I get in line, I'm going to have a little bit longer conversation with the lady that's checking me out. And then while I'm waiting for my Starbucks to come, I just say to somebody and I give them a compliment. Hey, I really like your necklace that you're wearing. And just see what it feels like to be somebody that other than I am. So if I'm really shy, like, you know what, I'm going to try to be a little bit more outgoing today and just try that shirt on and just see how it feels. There's no harm in just trying to be somebody else for a day.
One of the most helpful things that my dad did, because he saw that I was kind of shy growing up, we would have I have a big Indian family, tons of cousins every year since I was probably born, 2, 3, 4, 5 weddings a year.
Yeah.
Right. And Indian weddings
Those are not
big.
small weddings.
They're big. My sister's wedding was like 1,000 people.
1,000?
Right. Not 1,000, 800, but
Wow.
very close.
That's wild.
And they're big fat Indian weddings, ton of family. It's an honor to be invited. So we're flying around the world all the time to go to these weddings because it's a big honor. And in the Indian tradition, it's a big, like other traditions as well too, it's a big deal. My dad would see that I was shy and I was starting to be like in middle school, at that age, you're hitting puberty. And he said that, when we're at these family events, you have to think of yourself as really a host and an ambassador for the family, right? I want you to go and welcome people. And I would say, Dad, I'm shy. I don't know how to do it. He said, it's not about you. Just make them feel comfortable, right? Ask them if they want something. Just pretend like you literally are in charge here. I'm like, but I'm not in charge.
You're like, I'm 8
no,
years
you're part
old.
of the family. You're in charge here.
Yeah.
If, get them water, get them a chair, ask them if they're okay. Ask them if they need anything. And I would try this on. I would walk around and I would just pretend like I'm in charge, right? And you walk differently when you're in charge.
Mm-hmm.
You speak differently when you're in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And that little tiny thing I kept into my adulthood. And it would be in situations, especially in business, as I've started multiple businesses throughout my career, when I would enter into a situation where I was like, I actually don't know what to do here. Okay, even if you don't know what to do, pretend like you're in charge. What would somebody in charge do? Who would they call for help? How would they approach the situation? How would they get clarity through action? It's a tiny little phrase, but it's stuck with me for my entire adulthood.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. And it's just like, a lot of times people just want to stay in their comfort zones, and it's like, it's pushing you just a little bit further out. And as you push yourself out, you feel as you realize it's safe. And as you feel it's safe, it's like, okay, I can do this. Like I have a friend, Todd Herman, who writes about like having an alter ego, and it's like, I don't have to be like the hardcore business person when I'm hanging out with my wife, but there's some times where I'm like, okay, I'm going to put this hat on, and then I'm going to take that hat off, and I'm going to go home, and I'm going to be this way with my wife. And so it's like, we could just try these things on and just say, hey, yeah, like in this moment I can be this way. In this situation, I can be this way. When I go home and, I have to turn the business and the podcast guy off, I can just be this way with my wife. And it's like, there's no reason why we can't just try these things on and just see how they work for us.
In terms of trying things on, there's a great concept in the book, and I'm going to jump around a little bit here.
Yeah.
Going back to a question that I shared earlier, I often hear from my community saying, you know what? I love these guests you have on. I want to live a big, meaningful life. I just don't know what I want, right? I don't know what I actually want. I want something more, but I'm not exactly sure what I want. And you have this idea, which is a question you ask people, which is, how often do you try new things? And its relationship to this idea of, what do I want in life? Can you talk about that?
Well, I mean, if somebody doesn't know what they want in life right now, there's a pretty good chance that they haven't found it, or they're not opening themselves up to, I guess there's two options, right? So it's like, number one is they're not opening themselves up and they're saying, well, I'm being realistic, right? And they're quote unquote realistic. And so that's the first thing of it. The other thing is like, maybe they just haven't found it yet. And so the one thing I've been saying for years now, like one of the quotes that people always repeat back to me, I say is that if you don't know what your passion is, completely fine. But now that you are aware that you don't know what your passion is, it is not okay for you to not wake up every single morning and be in constant pursuit to find what that thing is. Because there's something that's inside of you that is just like, maybe you haven't discovered yet. And so the thing is, and we all find ourselves, I found myself like waking up about 6 months ago, and I was like, I feel like I've been doing the same thing for like 2 years, like the same exact patterns, Monday through Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I was talking to my wife, I was like, let's just switch things up. Let's do stuff different. Like, let's hang out with people we haven't hung out with for a while. Let's go to new places. Let's travel new places, let's eat new restaurants. It's like, we get into these patterns of doing the same things over and over again, where it's just like, okay, if I'm sitting here and I'm going, you know what, I don't really know what I want. Well, why don't I just go try new things and see if I can find it? Maybe there's somebody who, the other part of it that's super important too is that I think is very important for people to hear is that your passion doesn't always have to be your paycheck. A lot of people think like, okay, well, I love riding horses. And there was that one time, like I had a student years ago who she loved riding horses. She would have children, like special needs children, come and ride the horses. And it was like, she loved it. It made her feel amazing inside. But she's like, I can't make any money doing it. And I was like, well, who says that you have to make money doing that? Maybe you have a job that you enjoy. It gives you a lot of free time. And then you spend as much as your free time taking kids and taking people who might have special needs or, children or that even older people, and just taking them for rides on horses, if that's what makes you feel alive. And so for her, she knew what it was, but she wouldn't allow herself to step into it, which happens with a lot of people. It's like, kind of have it in the back of our head, but we're like, that's not realistic because I won't become a millionaire doing that. Right. And so I think that's the problem with a lot of people is they think like, I have to make $1 million doing this thing. I have to make six figures a year in order to do it. The other thing I think is important about passion is I've heard that there's two different types of people when it comes to passion. The first one is called a jackhammer, and the second one is a hummingbird, right? A jackhammer, like I can identify as a jackhammer, which means like I know what my passion is, and I'm okay working all day, every day for that thing because I'm so ridiculously passionate about it. Like I will die for the message of what I'm trying to work for. Like that's just like a jackhammer, like just gonna go through the wall if I have to. A hummingbird, if you ever see a hummingbird, we have a lot of them in Texas where I live, they'll go from flower to flower to flower to flower. And it's like a lot of people I think are hummingbirds, which is like you can go for, be really passionate about this thing for 3 years. And it makes you feel good. It makes you feel great. And then you might go, you know what? Yeah, I feel like I've kind of done everything I could do here. I'm going to go find another thing to be passionate about. So I think the first thing is your passion doesn't have to be your paycheck. And the second thing is your passion doesn't have to be something that you do until the day you die. It could be like, this is one thing I'm just really curious about learning over the next couple of years. And I think if you take those two viewpoints and put them in, a lot of people are like, okay, there's not as much pressure. And I think I can start to look and try to discover what I could be passionate about for the next 2 or 3 years.
I love that. I'm going to go into fear and the two types of fear that are there. But before we do that, let's give our audience a little bit of context of just your origin story, right? From what I understand, like you were in that place where you were a successful career, right? Things were working out financially for you. You were in the consulting space.
Yeah,
Is
I was
that right?
in sales consulting.
Sales consulting. And kind of we're going through a series of life changes where you thought like, I want something different. Walk us through that.
Yeah. So I'll take even a further step back. So when I was 19, I started in a sales company and, was incredibly shy, never did any public speaking. And this sales company was just hardcore in personal development. And when I found personal development, I was like, oh yeah, this feels, I would never say, I think everybody should go to therapy at some point in time in life, but it felt like I was kind of becoming a little bit of my own therapist. There was a lot of trauma that I had from my father being an alcoholic, not showing up, all that stuff that I told earlier. I always tell people I had the best type of alcoholic father. He didn't hurt me. He didn't yell at me. He didn't touch me inappropriately. He got drunk and he fell asleep and forgot about me, right? So that's neglect though. So there's an emotional side of that side, right? But a lot of stuff comes with that. So once I found personal development, I was like, oh, I can start to kind of help myself and work through this. So I started with that company when I was 19. When I was 20, I was promoted to a assistant with them and started doing trainings. So by the time I left that place, I was 24 and I had trained over 2,000 sales reps, this huge team of sales reps. And the thing that I loved the most was teaching people what helped me improve myself. And when I left, I went and did sales consulting, and I was 27 years old and I was making like 250 grand a year. I was working from home. And I was like, I just feel completely unfulfilled. Like I was not depressed, but I could feel myself like getting really close to like being depressed with where my life was going. And so I was sitting at Jason's Deli with my wife. I remember specifically, and it was beginning of 2015. And I was like, I'm going to start a podcast. And she's like, okay. Because podcasts weren't like huge back in 2015, right? Like it was hard to tell people how to listen to a podcast in 2015. There was no apps on your phones to listen to them, all of that stuff. And she's like, why? And I was like, I just feel obligated to teach people what's helped me. And I was like, she's like, I don't know if you can make money doing that. I was like, I probably can't, but like, there's something inside of me that needs to come out. And so I started the podcast. And as I got more into the podcast, I started hating what I was doing on the other side even more. And so I made the decision, and it was a really hard decision, that I was going to leave where I was at 27 years old, making $250,000 a year, barely working, to follow this like podcasting thing and to try to grow a coaching business and whatever might come from it. Like I had no idea I was going to make any money or how I was going to do it. And the thing that was the most important though, is that it felt right. And my wife always says like, she's like, whatever you think is right, if it feels right, I'll trust it, because you have like one of the best intuition of any person I've ever met. And if it feels right for me, I'll follow it and I'll put 100% into it. And that's kind of what happened with me. Was I was at the point where I was like, I was looking at my boss and I was going, I don't want her job in 5 years. So why am I here? I was like, I need to pivot in some sort of way.
Yeah, it could be good for her, but it wasn't meant for you.
Yeah, she's still at the company. She's still killing it, 9 years down the road, and she's great. And I love her, and I catch up with her every once in a while. But for me, it just didn't feel like the thing I wanted to do. And so I was like, I just got to quit cold turkey. And there was a lot of fear that came with it. Like people were always like, man, how did you do it so gracefully? I'm like, I didn't. I woke up every morning thinking I was going to go back and work for someone else. And I was like, and I'll tell you even a deeper story that's around it. I was in so much fear that about 4 months after starting the podcast, about a month after leaving the job that I was at, I was like, I'm going to go work for someone else. And as I had this thought, my sister, I was at her house and she goes, hey, have you ever seen this box of dad's stuff? And I was like, no, it was like 10 years, 12 years after he passed away. And it was like his glasses, his watch, and there was a couple other things that were in there. And there was a lot of letters. My dad was in jail when I was a kid, and he wrote letters to us. That's how he kept in touch with us. And the letter that I wrote, he wrote my sister on her 19th birthday. So I'd have been 13 years old. And he wrote it to her. And the last line said, I hope you live your life with courage, love, and laughter. And I read it and I was like, it was like the universe kind of like shifted. And I was like, he wrote this for me. And I was like, he wrote it for her, but he wrote it for me because this is exactly what I need to hear. Because I was in so much fear. And the first line said courage. And I was like, courage is the opposite of fear. And I was like, I'm like getting goosebumps even thinking about this. I was like, courage is the opposite of fear. Okay, it's 2015. My dad wrote this for me in 2001. So this is 14 years later. I was like, did the universe just like shift? Like it was this weird moment. And I was like, I got to commit. I was like, how do I commit to this thing? And I was like, I'm gonna get a tattoo. I was like, and I had no tattoos at that point. So I literally, on my arm right here, you can't see it, but it says, live your life with courage, love, and laughter. It's my dad's handwriting blown up and put on my arm. And I was like, I'm either going to succeed at this thing or I'm dying. I'm going to die trying. There is no other option for me. And when I like made that full on commitment, everything started falling into place after that.
Yeah. And it wasn't that it wasn't tough. It was
It
tough.
was so hard. Yeah.
It wasn't that there wasn't fear. There was
So
a
much
ton of fear. And yet you still move through that. And that's what your podcast and your coaching is all about. Mindset Mentor. Obviously, it's a podcast. We'll link to it below. People can follow it, if they're not already following it right now. And a lot of those key lessons and themes that you talk about there, you put inside of the book, Level Up, a link in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
A couple of things that I want to go into as you're, sharing that story. And thanks for sharing that story with our audience.
Yeah.
You mentioned that like you were following your energy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another great quote that I heard from actually your interview with Lewis Howes that you guys did together that I wrote down.
He's the only other interview where I've ever talked about the thing on my arm. That's funny.
Yeah. I love that interview. I know Lewis, he's great. You're obviously great. Yeah, this quote you shared, God/the universe, whatever people's religious beliefs are, speaks through you through energy, speaks to you through energy, right? And I think that that's one thing that's super important in this process here is that going back to that hummingbird concept is that we all may not know what we're ultimately, like, I don't even know what I'm ultimately meant to do. And I'm not obsessed with that idea. I'm just doing what I'm meant to do right now, what I enjoy. And often I'll follow that aspect of what adds energy to my life, what fuels me, that even if it's tough, even if it's challenging, even if I'm unsure, even if there's a ton of fear, I'm going to follow the fact that I feel lit up by this idea or concept that I want to pursue. Can you chat a little bit more about that?
Yeah. And this is, when I look at everything, I sit in silence a lot by myself. And I try to learn a lot. Like I'll go on my back porch and it's all trees that are outside. And I'm like, I'm part of nature. What can I learn from nature? And I always like sit there and I'm like, what can I learn? And when you look at like nature, when you look at quantum physics, when you look at all of it, everything in this world is energy, right? So like I'm energy, this hand is just energy. It's just moving atoms. This desk that's this desk that's in front of us, this is energy as well. It's just slower moving than my hands. And so I'm like, what's the thing that holds everything together? And it's like energy is the thing that holds everything together. And what I've found is that if something doesn't give me energy, it's not the thing that's for me. But there's some things like, for instance, I will get done with this podcast episode and I will have way more energy than when we started. Like just, it comes out of me. Like it just gets me excited. It's not because of like having coffee or anything like that. It's like, I get more energy from doing this thing. I think a lot of people underestimate how much energy is stolen from them from doing things that they don't want to do, right? It takes way more energy to drive to a job that you hate than to do something that you're truly passionate about. And so when you find something that truly lights you up, and you feel it and you're like, this thing I feel like I have more energy. I get excited when I think about this thing. That's usually the thing that's meant for you. The problem is it's not blatantly in our face all the time. It's kind of, we have to take a step back and be like, how do I feel? Oh man, like I feel really drained right now. Okay, this probably isn't meant for me. And I've had a lot of people send me messages be like, Rob, I quit my job because of you. And I'm like, I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. I hope you don't have like a mortgage you got to pay. So if someone's out there and they're like, yeah, my job doesn't give me energy. Okay, well, you might have a mortgage and children and all this stuff, but like, could you come up with a transition plan? Like over the next 2 years, I'm going to decide what this thing is. I'm going to figure it out and start saving up money to transition out of this job. I don't think people should just quit immediately, especially if they have responsibilities. But I think just getting to the end of your life and just regretting what you're doing is probably the saddest thing that could happen to somebody. And so I think what's most important is like, I believe, and it's my personal belief, that God speaks in the silence. When I sit in the silence, and there's no religion that's behind this, it's just the way that I feel, is like, if I can be silent and I can listen and I can be like, how do I feel right now? When I think about going and doing this new thing in my business, I'm like, yeah, I'm feeling kind of anxious right now. okay, that might not be the thing for me. But if I think like, well, what if I did this event coming up in 6 months and we have 1,000 people there? And I'm like, oh my God, that's super exciting. There's probably some message that's in there. And so I think it's just about being silent a little bit more, not being, I deleted Instagram and all that stuff from my phone so I can just have more space just to like listen. And that's what I think a lot of people should do is like, just be alone with yourself a little bit more and be like the question you said earlier, like, what do I want? And the question could be, what do I want? It could be extremely vague. Or you could say, what do I want in my relationship with my wife? What do I want in my relationship with my children? What do I want in my career? What do I want in my bank account? What do I want in my traveling? What do I want? And you just ask yourself those questions and, you can get a pen and paper and just start writing down all things you want. And if something gets you excited in there, that's probably something that's meant for you.
Sometimes people write things down, they get excited, and then the next thing that comes up for them is this statement either to themselves or other people that I want that, but I'm afraid to pursue it. So the whole first chapter of the book is all about breaking down fear. You get into the top fears that people have, but first there's sort of this important concept that you share with the audience about the difference between real versus imagined fear. And we've all heard some variation of this, but it's so important to understand our relationship with these two types of fears and how they're holding all of us back, right? Even there's times where I realize like, oh my gosh, is that an actual thing? Is that an actual fear? Or is that something that I just made a part of my identity because of some sort of, past experience? So Can you set up the topic of fear?
Yeah. I mean, as humans, we're animals and we're always trying to protect ourselves, right? So that's really what it comes down to. In this moment, like in my comfort zone, I know I'm safe. Outside of my comfort zone, I don't know that I'm safe because it's something I've never done before. And so when you look at fears, like I love this topic because they're like so many people just don't do something because there's some sort of fear. And, the fears that I always hear the most when I ask people and I have an audience in front of me, it's like fear of rejection, fear of other people's opinions, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of not being loved, fear of disappointing other people, not being able to pay the bills, all that stuff. Right. And when you look at it, and the way this came about for me, I had a friend, Chad, that went and lived with a native Brazilian tribe in Brazil. And so when I say native Brazilian, like he had to fly to Brazil, he had to go on a boat for 2 days through the Amazon to get to this tribe. And he lived with them for 40 days and he lived in a teepee. They have almost no outside contact. And to the point where he literally had to have a machete in his hand everywhere he went. And he was like, because he had to sleep with him also in his teepee next to him because stuff would walk in the middle of the night. And he would go hunt anacondas with him. Like I'm talking like literally in the middle of nowhere. Right. And he's the one who kind of clicked this into my head. And I started researching and going deeper into it is he would have to walk with machete everywhere. And he said, because if you saw a jaguar, that thing's been following you for a long time and it's okay being seen because it already knows that it's coming after you. And I was like, what was that like? He was like, it was like the most fear I've ever felt in my entire life, but the most alive I've felt in my entire life. And he looked me like dead in my eyes and he goes, you want to know the craziest part about it? Not one of those people is depressed. And he goes, you want to know why? They don't have time to think about anything other than survival. And so I was like, interesting. Tell me about that. We basically talked about like, he goes, when I came back to America, I realized everything that I was afraid of had nothing to do with my survival. Nothing to do with me living. It was all of these things that I made up in my head. And so then we started talking about, okay, so there's primal fears, which is a primal fear, the way I define it. And this isn't saying like just FYI out there, like saying depression isn't real. I'm not saying that any sort of way. But what I'm saying is, there are some times where people can take a step back and be like, am I just, going down the wrong route in life? Can I change things up? All of that stuff. But really when we started breaking down, it's like primal fears are pain or death is attached to it. Right. So like if I'm on the edge of a cliff, that's a primal fear because I could fall off the edge of that cliff. But if I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, I want to post this thing on Instagram, but what is my mom going to think about me? That's not a primal fear. That's what I call an intellectual fear. And so a primal fear is pain or death is attached to it in some sort of way. Intellectual fear is something else, which means that there's no pain, there's no death attached to it. So when you look at all of the things that I basically just said, the fear of failure, the fear of success, the fear of judgment, fear of any of those things, those are all intellectual fears. And so if they're intellectual fears, do they exist in our physical reality? No. Where do they exist? In the mind. And if they exist in the mind, well, then I can start to try to work through them. And so when you look at an intellectual fear, most people are out there and they're like, well, of course I don't want to put this thing on Instagram and then, get fired from my boss because then I won't be able to feed my family and stuff. Yeah, that could happen. That's like the worst thing that could happen. But when you look at intellectual fears, the first thing that came into my head was, okay, if I'm going to have fears, how do most people, we can identify them. But when you identify them, the very next question is, okay, well, how do I overcome this fear? And I remember specifically when I was writing this book, what I would do every day is I would write, and then I would go on a drive and I would listen. I listened to a lot of, spiritual gurus and stuff like Krishnamurti. Like I was saying, I was listening. I think it was Sadhguru I was listening to, and I was like typed in overcoming fear. And the thing that I put inside the book, which is the thing that like is one of the most highlighted that I can see when I go back inside a Kindle and I can see what people are, highlighting in the book, is on page 17 of the book. It says how to overcome your fears. You can't overcome something that doesn't exist. And so we're constantly trying to fight our fears, but our fears aren't even actually real if they're intellectual fears. And so what we're doing every single morning, say my fear of failure is what I'm dealing with, right? Is I'm waking up in the morning, I'm creating the boogeyman. And then instead of building my business or whatever it is that I'm trying to do, I'm fighting the boogeyman versus actually building the business. And so the intellectual fear, when we really start to dive into it and ask the questions like you and I are speaking of, like testing the validity of these thoughts, you realize that they really don't hold weight majority of the time. And so with all of the fears that we have, and there's a quote in there that's from a guy named Carl Albrecht, and it says, fear is based off of our perceived things that could possibly come in, perceived pain into the future. And so what we're doing when we're in fear is we are sitting in this moment where nothing is wrong. I'm projecting myself into the future, thinking about what could happen, feeling those feelings of it happening right now, and then not taking action because I don't want to feel those feelings. Even though right now, nothing is wrong and all I need to do is take action. And so, I kind of went down a rabbit hole on it, but that's why I wrote an entire chapter on fears, because I found so many people are like, I'm afraid of this, and this is the reason why I'm not doing it. And I've almost never hear somebody say any primal fear that's actually holding them back.
Yeah, a big part of what I got a reminder of in the chapter, it reminded me of here in LA, we have Reverend Michael Beckwith, who's founder of the Agape Spiritual Center. A lot of great conversations. We've had him on this podcast a few times, and he has this fantastic quote. He's like, just take your fear along with you.
Yeah.
Right. You see your fear. You're like, okay, I acknowledge it. Right. I understand that I have an identity that is made up a bunch of different parts. Okay, great. I understand when I was younger, my parents, not my parents, but somebody might feel this way. Like anytime I did something that wasn't perfect, they said, oh, don't embarrass us, or don't fail, or don't do this, or whatever. And that led to you feeling like you don't want to try new things. You're afraid of failure. You're afraid of this. You're afraid of that. It's like, all right, we have very, strong reasons that we might feel that is part of our identity, and we might be worried about doing something. Okay, great. That's one part of you. It's not the full story, which is why the next chapter is all about identity, which we talked about earlier. And it's okay to take that with you.
Yeah.
Right. You said also in the book, it was like, don't try to get rid of your fear.
Right.
Partly because it's not something that's actually real. But another part of it is that sometimes people actually think, oh, Rob, he left his business and he started his podcast, and now he has one of the top podcasts in the world. He got over his fear, and that's how he started his podcast.
Right.
I'm sure the fear was with you the whole way through, and yet you still pushed through.
I felt fear this morning when I was getting ready, where I was like, I hope I don't screw up on this podcast. Like literally, I felt that. And as I was driving, I had to listen to Ram Dass, as I usually do. And I'm like, okay, it's just about service. That's all that it is. Whatever's supposed to come out of me is what's going to come out of me. So that you're 100% correct, which is when I know, you probably know extremely successful people. I know pretty successful people, and they are not, they haven't overcome fears. They've just understood that fears are always there, and they're going to do it regardless of the fear, which is what you're basically saying, which is they're going to be there. But it's either you listen to them or you're just like, hey man, yeah, let's go on a ride. Just get in the passenger seat with me. And so for people to be like, I've done 1,400 podcast episodes, and there's still a part of me is like, I hope I don't screw this up. Like that's just the way that it is as a human, and that's okay. But I'm not going to not show up or text you and be like, hey man, feeling sick today. I'm just going to show up and try my best. And it's like, goes back to what we were talking about literally right before we started, which is, are you on self or are you on purpose? Right. And if I'm on myself, I'm thinking, I hope I don't screw this up so I don't look like an idiot. If I'm on purpose, it's, I just want to show up and serve and try to be as in tune with myself as possible. And whatever's supposed to come out is hopefully going to come out and impact people.
Yeah, we were chatting about this before we hit record, so it's worth repeating. This is a friend of yours, Matt, who's a mentor in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And he shared a quote with you, which has been one of your most powerful sort of sayings and personal mantras. You got to get off of yourself and get on your purpose, which sets us up for the purpose conversation so perfectly here. But before we jump in, one of my favorite podcasts growing up was this podcast called This American Life. I don't know if you ever came across it.
I've heard of it. I've never listened to it.
It was big in the sort of public radio scene. It's like all these different intricate stories about just sort of literally the human existence, right? The host is this guy named Ira Glass. He's based out of Chicago, built this incredible team. They made it into, it was a documentary on Showtime, but it's like a classic top podcast, a podcast before there was even the name podcasts that were there. And one of the things on the topic of fear on this career advice episode that Ira Glass did as like a bonus episode, because people would always ask him like, what are your top advice for your career? If people want to be a creative, they want to be a storyteller, they want to create a body of work that you've created, which you're proud about, right? What is your number 1 and 2 tips? Number 1 tip, which actually has nothing to do with fear, was a life hack, which I love, was live close to where you work, and he had a whole bunch of reasons on that you can get to there and, be able to work anywhere. But the one that I thought that really showcased, which was related to fear, was try new things and put yourself on a regular deadline, even if it's a micro deadline. Obviously, he's coming from the world of news, publishing, stories, and deadlines are important. You can always make the story better. You can always make more references or more quotes or, have more contacts that are a part of it, but you have to be willing to publish. And going back to this idea that so many people are not willing to try something new and then put themselves on a micro deadline. And that micro deadline, in a way, it's like if you have something that's due tomorrow, right? Something low stakes on something that you actually care about and want to make progress on. It's like, yeah, your fear is yapping, but it's either you get it done or you don't get it done. And that's one of the things that I've seen in my own life has just helped me. If I care about something and I want to make progress on it, just have a little bit of like a micro deadline. And you have enough deadlines in your life that you have forgotten about fear getting in the way, even if it's in the background, speaking its sort of crazy voice that it's speaking.
Yeah, I love that. This is the most drastic example I can give you, but I'm going to give it to you. I used to do the same thing with people where I'd say, I don't do a whole lot of speaking anymore, but I used to do a lot of speaking back in the day. And I would go in front of people and I'd say, hey, what's the percentage chance of you making $1 million this year? And they would be like, 0%, 1%, like maybe one person would say 5%, but everyone's like 0, 0, 0. And I was like, what's the percentage chance of you making $1 million this year? And if you don't, everyone that you love dies. And everyone's like 1,000%, 1,000%, 100%. There's no way I'm not doing it. And I was like, why? And they're like, because I'm going to get it done because I care about all the people, which kind of like goes to like what you're saying, which is purpose, right? Which is you love these people so much. You have a real big purpose to actually go after this thing, which is you have a deadline to it. You know what you need to do. So the deadline didn't change. The goal didn't change. What changed is the actual reason why you're doing it. And there's a lot of things going back to the deadline of like, people work really well with deadlines. If you remember like a lot of people's parents, when they used to be like, it's trained into us from children. Hey, you better go do this. 3, 2, and you're like, I don't know what happens at 1, but I don't want to find out, right? And so like, we're used to just like moving towards it. Then you work for someone else and your boss is like, hey, I need this by 5 o'clock. And you're like, I don't want to get fired, so I got to get this done. You can impose deadlines onto yourself anytime that you want to. And there's a lot of research that actually finds that what you're saying is true, where people work better when they have some sort of deadline, whether it's given to them by someone else or whether it's self-imposed.
What were some of the early techniques or tools that, even if they sound so simple, were crucial in you regulating that nervous system?
Well, I think it was one of the exercises that I did was creating a new emotional contract with myself and a new healthy identity. So I guess you could call it kind of like a mantra, but it was deeper than that. It was more of like, I am something new and I'm becoming something new. So I used to feel like nothing was wrong with me because I was getting success and results and accomplishments. So I thought it was everyone else's problems and everyone else just didn't understand and get me. So everyone else was wrong. I wasn't wrong. That was my ego. And I used to feel like there was nothing wrong with me, even though I couldn't sleep at night and was stressed out a lot. But when I faced myself and started doing some of these exercises and workshops, one of the exercises was around creating a new identity and shaping the identity I wanted to become and step into. So maybe it wasn't who I actually was yet, but I wanted to step into this and become anytime that I felt like I was falling back into a negative pattern or in reaction or falling from grace emotionally. And that contract was, and still is 10 years later, that I am a loving, passionate, wise man. And before that, I believed that I was stupid. I believed that I was the dumbest person in every room. I believed that I was more frustrated and unforgiving based on my actions. I was angry based on my actions and reactions. I didn't think I was an angry person, but based on results, I showed up angry when I was triggered. And I said to myself, this no longer serves me, the people around me, or my mission. It doesn't help these things. It drains my energy. It sucks the life out of me. It lowers my vibration. It causes less abundance to come to my life and less joy. So is it really helping me to emotionally react in triggering situations or not? And it didn't help. So I had to realize that this is not helping me. This is not serving my mission. And I want to be clear on my mission and move forward towards that. And I also knew that it was hurting me in relationships, like being reactive, being guarded, being triggered was hurting me in intimate relationships, business relationships, friendships, family. And so I said, that's not what I want to be anymore. So I want to become someone new, a healthy identity. And I used to be a very intense self-critic to myself internally, speaking poorly to myself. Man, you're stupid. What an idiot you are. I can't believe you did that. You're such a dummy. I would say these things to myself. So I created an identity of those things because I believed them. And so when I started to realize, okay, I need a new contract for my identity in my life, a contract that I speak and own, a contract that I write down in words and I sign the contract. And that's what I did. So there was an exercise that allowed me to create this contract with myself identity in a empowering way, as opposed to the disempowering way that I'd done for 30 years of my life before then. And I think a lot of the world speaks to themselves in negative tones and words, internally and externally to other people. How many friends have you met in the past who were like, oh, I was such an idiot here. I can't believe I did this stupid thing. I just was not good enough, or I just didn't believe in myself, or I wasn't pretty enough to go do this, or I don't have the skills to do this, so why would anyone pick me? When we are so self-critical, it only disempowers us. We live in a powerless mindset with that state of being. The greatness mindset is creating a healthy identity with self and being a positive self-coach, not a negative self-critic. This may seem pretty basic concepts, but a lot of us don't apply this on a consistent basis. And so when I created this contract, I am a loving, passionate, wise man. Sign it. I had to embody it and believe it. And at the moment, I'd realized that that wasn't who I was fully, but it was who I wanted to become fully. And I was excited about embracing that way of being and practicing it. So it was a daily practice of saying this contract to self for a long time. When I would get triggered, I would say, no, I'm a loving, passionate, wise man. So what does a loving, passionate, wise man do in this scenario? How does he respond? How does he react? How does he show up? And I started living into that until it became me, until I embodied this way of being. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I can't write smart because I don't believe I'm smart. At the time, I didn't believe that because of past experiences. But I actually did believe I was wise. I believed I had like incredible relationship wisdom. I understood people. I believed I was really good at strategizing an idea and bringing it to life. I believed that I was really street smart, right? So I actually did believe I had wisdom and experience. So me being like, I'm a loving, passionate, intelligent, or smart, high IQ individual wouldn't have resonated with me. So it must be an authentic belief that you're stepping into that resonates. You can't lie to yourself. I did have love, but it wasn't consistent. So it was there, but now I needed to be consistent with it. I did have passion, but I also had a lot of anger. So it wasn't consistent. So now I'm going to transmute the anger into passion more consistently. I did have wisdom, but now I wanted to do it more consistently. So I became this contract and I stepped into it daily until I didn't need to say it to myself anymore. I became it.
That's so powerful. And like you said, it can seem so simple on the surface, and yet it's so profound. And I think one of the most profound things about it that's actually not simple in practice is that most people don't realize that they're constantly telling themselves some story. Now, it doesn't look like you waking up and immediately saying, I'm an idiot.
Yes.
Right? Sometimes it could look like that, but often it's in the background.
Yep.
You don't even realize that you have another contract with yourself, and you never maybe intentionally signed it, but life gave you a bunch of experiences and you co-signed it.
Exactly.
So that contract is already there. So this isn't about like, oh, this is weird here. You come up with some new mantra or contract that seems a little strange. By the way, you already have one, whether you think you have one or not.
Whether you signed it or not, you've been living by a certain set of beliefs. Call it a contract, call it a mantra, or a limiting belief, whatever you want to call it. However, whatever tool or experience or exercise necessary to support you in moving forward, I'm all for. And for the last 10 years, I've done a lot of them. The only thing I haven't done is psychedelics. But I feel like I've done and tried pretty much every type of therapeutic healing modality, from emotional intelligence and leadership workshops that allow you to do a lot of exercises embodying forgiveness and healing past pain, to, weeks-long meditation retreats in India where it was more about mindful meditation, to, week-long intensive neuroscience retreat with Dr. Joe Dispenza, where it was more about the science of the mind and how it affects the body. So heavy on intellectual intelligence, data, neuroscience, and practice, to Wim Hof breathing and all types of breathing strategies to release trauma from the body, to cold therapy exposure, to hot therapy exposure, to talk therapy with multiple different therapists and coach over the last decades, to just constantly being in the journey of interviewing the top neuroscientists, therapists, healers, spiritual leaders in the world over a decade and applying these things over time. So I haven't done everything, but I've done a lot of different things. And whatever works for you, do it. Use whatever emotional, psychological, or physical tools to support you and empower you to step into a better version of yourself that feels more peace, love, and freedom, whatever it is. And if it's psychedelics, cool. I've just never done it. And I am actually, for me, I have a lot of friends who have done it and swear by psychedelics. I've seen too many of the cases of how they affect the brain negatively and seen people actually go downward after psychedelics, that for me, I'd rather do everything without external drugs first in order to heal and process and create new tools. That's my belief. I feel like the body that we have, the brain, and the all the makeup inside of us is the strongest pharmacy, is everything in the body. It knows how to heal. It is the greatest healer if we allow it to do its job. So I believe with the body and with other psychological and emotional tools, we can heal and have strategies for peace and harmony. But that being said, if I went all these years and none of these things worked and I tried everything, I'd probably be like, okay, let's try the drugs. So I don't want to say like, don't do that, but I've just never done them. So I don't want to endorse it.
These are all tools in the toolbox.
Yes.
But fundamentally, and you and I are simpatico in this area, is at the end of the day, what tool is going to help you reestablish a different relationship with yourself?
100%.
And as somebody who, like you, done a lot of emotional intelligence workshops and many of the same things that you mentioned.
Yes.
For years, people would tell me, I had a lot of the early experts like Dr. Roland Griffiths on my podcast, psilocybin researcher at Johns Hopkins who really broke through a lot of this stuff. For years, people would say, try this, try that.
Right.
And I say, I have nothing against it. It's just not calling me now.
It's not calling me either. Yeah.
It's not calling me. And then last year, I met a group and I was like, oh, you know what? I liked their approach.
Yes.
I liked how they were approaching it and the fact that they were making it sacred.
Right.
It was a real pilgrimage, and it was really something that we were doing. And I decided, and I put that, just because you brought it up, I'm just adding into this. I went to my loved ones, my wife, who I recently married, and I went to my parents who listen to my podcast. Shout out to my mom and dad. And I went to my brother-in-law, who had also expressed some interest and had listened to a few of the episodes. And I said, this could be a really interesting experience. Would you guys want to do this together?
That's interesting.
And this group that was based in Hawaii, obviously this is all, talk to your doctor, everything else like that, all the things it's technically not legal to do, but generally decriminalized in different areas, set up this incredible retreat for us.
That's beautiful.
3 weeks ago we went.
Really?
And my parents and my wife and my brother-in-law and 2 of my best friends, we all had this journey and experience.
Wow.
And it was one of the most mystical experiences of our life.
That's beautiful.
Now, every single person there has put in the work.
Yes. Beforehand.
Beforehand. And even I've had top experts in psilocybin and different psychedelics that are out there. In our case, we were, it was a deeper experience with mushrooms, right? And they tell you that 90% of the benefit is not the trip. It is the integration.
The application.
The application.
That's the only thing, because you can go to any type of workshop that can get you a heightened state and feel like, oh, I just released all this stuff. It's life-changing. But most people go back to their old way of being within a few months after the effects wear off.
Exactly.
Everything is about the integration of whatever you do. Therapy is the same way. You could have this big awakening in therapy, but if you're not applying the lessons daily when life happens, you won't integrate it. And so it won't be effective. And there's a lot of people that I know who swear by ayahuasca and mushrooms and psychedelics, and it's like they got to do it every month. And I'm like, well, what's the point of doing it every month as opposed to just applying it after once or twice and applying the things you're learning and not needing a drug? So again, I'm not against it or for it. I've never done it. And I think the way you did it makes sense if you're going to do it in a sacred environment with close friends and family. But applying the lessons continually is where you gain the wisdom. Not just, I had an awakening and a mystical experience and it was the craziest experience of my life. Okay. And 3 weeks later, are you still an asshole? Are you still, not open with your loved ones? Are you still not generous and giving? Are you still beating yourself up? Then the experience was a great moment, but you've got to do the work consistently to apply the things that you're holding you back. So.
Your pain analogy earlier was really for me, was the unlock also in my own life. How much can you look at the pain, the thing that you're stuffing below? You're spending all your energy. People don't realize it. They're wearing a backpack and it has 500 pounds of rocks in it. And it feels like life is so tough. Even the things that should bring them joy in their life.
Right.
I used to have a story around how capable I was and my contribution to things. So when I would have a company that would do well, when I would have a situation that would do well, when I would have a business partner and we'd have a strategy that worked out and the company would make millions of dollars and I was a part of it, I was not the only part of it, I would always discount that and I'd say that was just luck.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
That was my narrative. Is that wasn't something that I was a part of along with the team and that I shepherded and I was a part of that success. It was like, this was random. And, through doing some of these.
Man, I wish I had some of your randomness,
And, I know a little bit of your journey. So I know some of the workshops and stuff you've done. I've done similar ones, but maybe they were called different things.
Uh-huh.
And one of the narratives that I got very clear on is that when I was younger, my parents, especially being immigrant parents, put so much emphasis on school. Mm-hmm. And I really struggled right around the age you start doing regular spelling and arithmetic. And I don't know about your school back in the day, but when you get a bad grade on a test, you'd have to take it home and your parents would sign it to show that they've seen it, not wait till the report card. So I was getting all these bad grades on tests and I'm bringing it home to my dad and he's like, we spend so much time with you. We spend all this time after school with you. And we're just at the beginning of arithmetic and math and other things. And you are not just struggling a little bit. You're really struggling. My parents are banging their head against the wall and I get reprimanded. So what did I learn how to do? Okay, the teacher gives you the paper. I'd crumple it up and I'd stuff it in my desk.
Wow.
Because when I take the paper home, I get in trouble. I get scolded. Well, what do kids do? They're trying to just avoid pain.
Yes.
Stuff the paper, stuff the paper, stuff the paper. Finally, like 3-4 weeks later, my teacher's like cleaning the desk and like my desk is underneath in the little cubby is overflowing.
Oh man.
She pulls it out. She calls my parents and I'm home at the time because this is after school. And my parents pick up the phone and are like, yes, this is his parents. And I see them looking at me. And then my dad is like looking over at me and talking to my teacher and then puts down the phone. It's like, how could you lie?
Ooh.
Right? That was the phrase.
Ooh,
right? That was the phrase.
The shame around that, the guilt. Oh,
and
man.
I internalized in that moment. I knew immediately what it was about. I am a liar.
Oh, no.
And internalizing I am a liar is that anything that I'm involved in, right? Even if I see that there's some success attached to it, no, that's not me. That's luck.
Wow.
Because if that was me, there was some part of me that also felt that, well, I'm a liar. Well, if I'm a liar, is this true? So instead of leaving it to me, let's leave it up to luck. It was luck. I got lucky this time, right? Until I really understood that narrative. And these stories we tell ourselves when we're a kid are so powerful. It was such a tiny moment. And that was my version. For somebody else, it's going to be not getting picked for the team. It's going to be somebody telling you you're not pretty enough. It's going to be somebody telling you you're not smart, whatever it is. Until I unpacked that story and really, like you talked about, gave it a new meaning and understood, I'm just a child. I'm just doing the best that I could. In my case, actually, fast forward, this teacher actually was a big unlock to my life. She started noticing me. She started spending more attention because my dad and my mom asked her for help. And she saw, oh, it's not that he's not trying. He's not putting in work. He actually is genuinely, he has dyslexia.
Wow. Yeah.
And dyslexia is something that affects the same part of the brain that controls math and spelling.
Yeah.
And I had to stay after class to go through this training.
Yeah.
And it was one of the biggest changes. But also, I don't know if you know this, but 60% of Fortune 500 CEOs have dyslexia.
I know.
This one thing that looks like a wound in one area actually becomes this superpower. Why? Because if you have dyslexia, you get good at asking people for things. You're not afraid to ask the dumb question because you really need it broken down to you. And those are things and skill sets that follow you along in life.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And
when did you realize this and what allowed you to start processing differently?
I, for the first time, got a glimpse in it. I was probably around the age of 22. I did this program called Landmark Forum, right? Which is probably like a sister program to some of the work that you've done.
Yes.
And in there and in seeing that a lot of our negative patterns come from insecurities. And those insecurities also make us good at certain things. And when you get good at something, you also don't want to get to the root cause of that pain. And me spending all this effort and energy not wanting to address the truth, which is that deep down inside, I actually fundamentally believed that I was somehow a fraud or a liar. And what is the beautiful part of that? The kid who was just trying to do his best that didn't know. And yeah, I'm not dyslexic anymore. It pops up every so often here and there. Even if that thing is in the past and you've healed it and you've moved on, maybe emotionally you haven't healed it.
Right.
So seeing it in its truth, similar to your story, understanding where it came from, forgiving myself, maybe apologizing to people. Because when you believe, when you're driven by this thing, I'm not a liar, I'm not a liar, I'm not a liar, guess what? Later on in your life, you develop bad habits where you actually become that thing because you're spending so much energy trying not to be.
Wow.
So I had to forgive myself, but I had to go apologize to some people. Projects that weren't handled well. Parts of me where I did not want to tell somebody I'm overwhelmed, I can't take this on, because if I did, that would mean that I'm a liar and I shouldn't have taken on the first place.
Man.
And meanwhile, everybody around me would have said, okay, hey man, listen, you're all good. Dude, I would run to a meeting 15 minutes late and I'd be so worried about telling the person that I'm running late because I promised that I'd be on time.
Yes.
If I'm not on time, I'm a liar, right? If I'm a liar, I'm a fraud. And that's exactly what's running my life.
And I don't deserve any of this.
I don't deserve anything. So I wouldn't tell them I'm running late. And then I get there and people would be like, dude, a call would have been nice.
Sure. Let us know before. Let
us know before. It would be nice, you know? And I think I'm such a failure. And meanwhile, these people around you, they just love you. And it's not a big deal to them, but it's a big deal to you. We all have stories like that are running our lives. and are running the show until we decide to question it.
I know, man.
Hey YouTube, if you enjoyed what you just saw, keep watching for more great content on how to improve your brain and your life.
What happened was it went from fear, I don't know if it's possible, and I started finding all the reasons why it's not, to I'm so excited. I started working harder. My business started growing. I realized that I can make it happen, and we actually made it happen.